So, can we shoot the picture in 30 days?
Absolutely not. Maybe. Let me look at the schedule.
Hank, what do you think?
Hank's not really a shooting schedule kind of guy.
Silence, agent!
Yeah, I mean, just look forward in the dangers of E-personality. And he's an introvert, incel or whatever. And when he comes out on the internet, he has this, like the dark side of his subconscious becomes conscious. I mean, to me, it's obvious. It's what happens. It's what's happening to you on the same way. But your unconscious, your subconscious is different than Gandalf's subconscious.
Logic and science dictate that not only consciousness doesn't exist, consciousness is in fact scientifically impossible. And yes, it is going to involve math and calculus and science and computer programming. I'm sorry. And that have different implications of the process with the connection between the levels of a person's soul and how it reincarnates.
But I'm not going to spur on the issue because I'm not a woman. It's not my issue.
About how one day you're going to fulfill the Canadian dream and the American dream. So you watch Seinfeld and say, I could do it. And I'm going to go out tomorrow and go to work and have a great day and I'm going to be successful. And one day I'm going to have my own apartment. I'm going to have my own parties with my own friends over. And I'm going to have my own possessions. I'm going to see things that I want and just buy them.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of yours.
Hello, and welcome back to Week in Review with the one and only Doooovid. Whoops, looks like my screen share has failed, so I will just reshare the screen. I'll hand it over to you, Doooovid, for the introductions. Thanks for being with us here this evening.
Okay, great. Yeah, good to be back. It's another week. Interesting, things happen. I appeared on Ralph's quite a few times for hours in this news stream. Zabita El Arabi, this Muslim woman in London, who I guess found me on Ralph, sent me the message. She got a pretty big channel, and so I was on hours and hours of streams. Although Ralph's, I didn't talk that much. It was kind of his normal stream, and all these other people. This new guy from Israel, this Anan guy, Mossad, who I don't think is actually Mossad, but just some random Israeli guy calling himself Mossad, Juminati, that people have been telling me about that stream for a while, but he only has a few hundred subs. Unclear exactly.
Calling yourself Mossad for internet clout. Ballsy.
Well, I mean, it's pretty common to say if you're just a random Jew or Israeli to, hype up, make yourself bigger than you actually are. But so Zobita El Rabia, that was maybe more interesting, that stream, and I argued with Muslims and for hours and hours, and they asked me questions.
For whatever reason, I can't even see your face at all. I'm sorry. I'm looking at this screen share here, and I can see hair and a slight bit of your eye. So I think the camera just needs to be completely changed.
I have it set.
You're not
I have
centered.
It set so it. I'm about to light the Hanukkah candles. I have it set. So
oh, my bad.
Have the Hanukkah candle, and if you want to put it on full screen in a second, I'll stand up and say some blessings. And I don't know. I'm not even sure if you could see that little. I have the CDs on my table and I have a little platter with the one candle. So tonight is the first night of Hanukkah. They had in Detroit the big menorah lighting. So I avoided politically provoked this week. We could talk about that. Norvin, I guess, ducked out of the JQ debate on Wednesday, and OV took his place. And I guess they liked OV or to somewhat, and then he was there again Saturday. So I just avoided that, and we could talk about that more. I'm not sure if anyone from politically provoked is. I didn't even advertise this because it seemed kind of like a trolly, LARPing audience. I wasn't even sure it was worthwhile trying to get any of those people over here onto Week in Review. although the other Carl came on a few weeks ago, was basically the only person who even like half somewhat, stood up for me or had, somewhat of a conversation with. So I just let that pass. I left their Discord, and Brittany even sent me the link to hop on that stream with OV, and I guess Domingo was there. So I was happy to avoid that. I actually popped on Claire's stream the night before with OV and Domingo, and it was interesting. We talked about, God forbid, World War II and some of the war crimes, doctor medical experiments. I think Judas restreamed that. So because tonight's the first night of Hanukkah, I didn't light my Hanukkah candle yet, so I'll start by saying the blessings and lighting the Hanukkah candle. Then maybe I'll try to say a quick chant, and then then we'll start week in review. I got some interesting links to share, and hopefully we have some stuff to talk about. And who knows if people show up or something interesting. Otherwise, we could just catch up with our research, talk about the immediate going on in our streaming careers, and end it with that. So I'm gonna take my earpiece out. You can hear me fine, right?
You're sounding all right so far.
Okay, yeah. If you want to put it on the picture of me on full screen, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to have to take my earpiece out, and you should be able to hear the blessings. And I'm going to light the candle. It'll take less than a minute. Okay, so the custom, it's actually a dispute in the Talmud, the 8 nights of Hanukkah, whether you should light 8 candles the first night and go down till 1, according to the school of Beis Shammai, or 1 the first night and another one till 8, the school of Hillel, which is practiced till today. So tonight being the first night, I will light 1 candle. So let me say these blessings. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah light. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasa nisim lavoseinu bayamim hu'eim bizman hazeh. Bless you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has wrought miracles for our forefathers in those days and this season. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lizman hazeh. Bless you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and brought us to this season. Okay, so there we go. Happy Hanukkah. So let that candle burn. It's Peter, Paul, and Mary. Light 1 candle for the Maccabee children. So I guess it's not such a big flame, hard to see. Oh, so we got IC3 racially aggrieved, our Ralph's friend from London. I'm not sure. Did you want to come on? I'm not sure if you want to send him the link, or if
I don't have any contact with him at this time. If you wouldn't mind sending him the link, he can definitely come and say hi. You might want to.
I don't have his contact. He has a YouTube channel, so I guess put your email if you want to come on. Put your email or where you want the link sent in the chat, and if you want to come on and talk. So that's Ralph's African friend who's on the stream.
Yeah, I know who he is. He seems cool. He was sort of slightly supporting me when I was laying down some heavy facts.
He may not be listening. He may just be put a message in the chat. So let me do a quick chant. I chanted this one last year. This is the famous Matzur, and there's one verse that's the most commonly chanted part of the Matzor about the Greeks. The fifth stanza: Greeks gathered against me, then in Hashmonaim days they breached the walls of my towers, and they defiled all the oils. And from the one remnant of the flask, a miracle was wrought for the roses. Men of insight, 8 days established for song and jubilation. Oh, sorry, I guess you got COVID, so hope you feel better, and we'll speak a different time. So maybe next week or every Sunday. So feel better, IC3. Yevanim, Yevanim, nikvetzu alai, azai b'mei hashmanim, ufartzu chaimois mikdolai, v'timu kol hashmanim, uminois sarkakanim, nase nes l'shashanim, b'nei bina, yemei shmoina, Kavu shirananim, b'nei bina, yemei shmoina, kavu shiranim. I think I mentioned this last year. Actually, next Sunday night is still Hanukkah also, so maybe we'll get another chant then. So Haneru Saloli is the other tune, and there's kind of these long ones usually sung by a kids choir, by like Hasidic groups. Sometimes you have a Hasidic choir. I have a Chabad version of the Haneru Saloli, bum bididum, and then there's a Vishnitz one. The Vishnitz one, starts out kind of like a bum bida bum, and low to high, and a long part takes like a full 10 minutes to sing. So I'm gonna just do like a 30-second clip of like the high part. Hanero saloli oni halikim, all hanisim v'al hanifluos, v'al hachios, v'al milchumos, sheyasitzu lavosenu bayamim umheim bisman hazeh, all Yedei Koyanechu Hagdoishim, all Yedei Koyanechu Hagdoishim. Okay, so with that, happy Hanukkah. So just, I'll get my links ready before I hand it back to Jennifer. I'll mention something interesting because I was talking to Zabita, and I was telling her the Lubavitch Rebbe's understanding of rebuilding the temple. And I told these, this Muslim channel is actually pretty big viewership, over like 80 people watching, and talking about the prophecy and the end of days. And I was saying, because I'm kind of liberal on Palestine and like pro-immigration, multiculturalism, that I would grant all Palestinians full citizenship of Israel. Like if it was, my thoughts on the politics of it is that I think Israel should just give full citizenship and be a nation that gives equal full rights to everybody, Jew, Arab, Palestinian, all people equally, although that's definitely a minority opinion. And so I mentioned that the prophetical understanding, according to most Jews, is that it's going to be the Muslims that rebuild the temple for us, and to say that I was telling them that they need to, and I wasn't telling what they should do, but our belief is that the Muslims will decide that it's going to be best for the world and them and the Jewish people to rebuild King Solomon's temple, and that the Muslims themselves will dismantle the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and will help us rebuild King Solomon's temple. And it's saying that the Muslims then will be able to bring offerings in King Solomon's rebuilt temple. So Zabita was mentioning that there are Islamic, so to say, prophecies or eschatology that at the end of the days, King Solomon's temple will be rebuilt. So it was a little interesting. It was a little heated discussion, because I was saying that, because there's a lot of tension over the Temple Mount, and even like Joseph Cohn and
You know what I
a lot
loved
of
about it? It was so much reminiscent of the time you talked to Adam, and it was like, wow, you're so consistent. Just
yeah. I
want
mean,
to throw
this
that
is
in.
I would say it's kind of just our beliefs. Like I would say the Hebraic belief system, and so a lot of people are scared to admit it.
I didn't even mean the Hebraic belief system. I meant the way you presented the ideas.
Yeah, so it was a little crazy, like, and then obviously a little tension because I think like because there's a lot of people that do, in fact, want to forcefully destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, take it down, and rebuild the temple. So I was saying the understanding of the majority of the sages is in fact that it will be the Muslims that voluntarily dismantle the Dome of the Rock and the mosque and help us rebuild the temple. So it's not actually going to be us as Jews that rebuild the temple. It's going to be it's going to be the Muslims that do it for us. So that was a little bit interesting. And then I'll show these links in a minute. Zobita, actually a blue-eyed Arab. So that was a pretty exciting chat. Maybe if she sends me the link again, I'll end up popping on a few more times this week because there was a lot to cover, and it was kind of random, where they just tossed at me like all sorts of statements from the Talmud and the rabbis that could possibly look bad, and so I like it as kind of a test of my learning. We
should get a name for that. How about Talmudic whack-a-mole? Because as soon as you go over one, there's like another one that pops up. It's like
I'm saying it's belittling to the infinite wisdom of the Talmud to compare it with
that's why you say I'm not going to play Talmudic whack-a-mole with you, and then it's just like a quick one-liner where it's like, I've got a meme for that. I'll come up with it in a minute.
Well, maybe. I mean, I do actually enjoy doing that. That's what what I signed up, what I like doing. But so maybe possibly. Okay, so why don't you, if you want, you could do your week in review, or say a few things. If you have like screen shares, you could do that later. So just say what you did this week and talk a few minutes while I get my screen shares to show up.
Cool. Hey, everyone in the chat and lurkers. I am just hooking all this up. It looks like I'm having some problems with the video here. El Patat is acting up again. Let's see here. Coming through? Nope. Pardon me, I am not able to multitask at this time.
We got Ralph here in the chat, so welcome, Ralph. He had the show. That Ralph show is kind of messy. Like we were talking about, kind of like Luke and Claire, where you kind of have like these random panels, and it's very hard to control. I mean, you get good viewership, some interesting conversation, but the conversations are kind of messy and directionless, and then it's kind of like just the loudest voice ends up talking the most. But if you wanted to talk again, Ralph, or organize, kind of say what you're trying to do or how you think you're going to do it.
8 hours self-indulgent streams where you like pass your voice through a filter to sound more epic. Wouldn't it just be easier to learn how to project your voice, Ralph? Come on, man. Improv. My mom had me take an improv class when I was in grade 5. If I had regrets,
I appreciate
it would be
Ralph
the smallest regret of my life.
Me the link. So I do appreciate Ralph having me on quite a few times, and he's even called me Master Doooovid, which I think refers to my title.
Yes.
I guess,
well, sure. Anything to avoid acknowledging the real one, right?
Well, that referred to my, I guess, position as a chess master.
Of course.
Well, actually, I streamed some chess earlier today.
I suffer from hubris, of course. Right. Yes. I'm an expert on such matters as overcompensating with some sort of weird opera filter. are you going to pick back up with what you were talking about? Because I know you haven't done your week in review yet, so I don't want to like launch into a big thing. I did have an interesting anecdote that an article in Nature was published labeled "Psychedelics Alter Metaphysical Beliefs." I can't remember the last time I saw that word in a publication. So, not to mention it was super interesting subject. Let's see here. I changed it over in the wrong. There we go. Yeah, so psychedelics alter metaphysical beliefs, 23rd of November, 2021. Not too long ago, so. I was sort of impressed with how it was worded. It really did seem to be targeted at a lay audience. I don't read, admittedly, much peer-reviewed stuff, but this one, yeah, I guess sort of seemed cool. So it does look like there was some evidence that showed that there was a shift away from, quote, hard materialism from taking certain psychedelic drugs towards, hilariously, I think they might actually use the term panpsychism. Yeah, panpsychism and fatalism. Not sure what fatalism is, but slightly scared to look it up. You want to take back over, Doof? You ready?
Yeah, and so I mean, if he does want to come on, I guess I'll send you the link on Twitter, and like your whole show on like radicalization, like because it was just kind of like a yelling paddle and got off topic. I didn't even get to talk about chunking theory, and so Ralph is actually one of the few people who actually knows and understands a little bit about chunking theory and is a chess player. But just the nature of the type streams he's making, just people yelling at each other. It's not very high IQ content. So I actually did have thoughts on the radicalization process from a psychoanalysis point of view, just in chunking theory, and understanding that people are working with the information that they have available, and it might be self-selective information. And if you look at it in forming chunks from the information that people have available, that the logic, people are logical actors largely, from a psychoanalytical point of view, but it depends on the chunks of information they have available, the logic. So you see, like, if you had a whole bunch of pieces of information, you might come to a different conclusion. But if you just had a handful of pieces of information, so I actually had wanted to come at it from that angle, and I actually was silent for like 2 hours, and it was just like the Mossad guy and whatever. So I didn't find the stream that productive, unfortunately. So but I did send Ralph the link on Twitter. So is my screen share working?
Just send that up right now. Won't be
Okay.
but a moment.
Oh, can you give me full screen, because I'm sharing?
Yeah, just about to. So.
Okay, so Ralph is a pretty known personality from what is called Speaker's Corner. So here's the Wikipedia of Speaker's Corner, and I guess if Ralph does come on and wants to talk about that, we just see at Wikipedia, Hyde Park, the most famous of the Speaker's Corner, where I guess possibly going back hundreds of years, but just known that people would give political speeches in this public park, maybe like Washington Square Park in New York City, but or Union Square, but more just a known thing that there's always people, giving these speeches and preaching publicly in different factions. So I put the Wikipedia of Speakers Corners. It's not you don't have it working?
Seems to be going down periodically, but I'll keep my eye on it. Chat, if you see the screen's not going, some of you longtime viewers may know I run this stream off a potato. It's very high-tech potato. It's potato nonetheless. So let us know if there's anything technically wrong. We always appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, it looks like it's not
Again.
working. It's just black.
Yeah, it's fine now. I've fixed it out. My apologies. Sometimes it just freezes, but it's fine now. I'm looking at what's currently being fed to the tube, and it's fine.
So here's Hyde Park. I think maybe this is where the Hare Krishna is also used to train. Maybe that's Trafalgar Square. But this is one of the more popular speakers' corners. We see this park that people will give speeches. Here is actually, I remember as a kid, this was probably the first time I heard of Speakers Corner. It's an episode of Married with Children that I watched every week for years, when I was maybe even pre-teenager, adolescent. And Al Bundy, the family goes to London and decides to give a speech at Speakers Corner about the problems of women. And so that would have been, I don't know what year, that would have been the 80s. So this video was actually posted today, and there's our good friend Claire Kaw on this channel talking to Muslims on Speakers Corner. So actually, if you watch
She's never looked more like a bodhisattva. Not that Claire could ever really look like much of a bodhisattva, but it does strike. She has a certain gravitas, doesn't she? Something.
Well, I mentioned her
regal about
Chinese
Claire.
blood. That I said, like, if you saw her in person, like, she's obviously Chinese, or maybe Malaysian Chinese, but and maybe somewhat of an enlightened person that she's thinking of higher issue. Like, so in the Married with Children,
Perhaps you mean principled, fallaciously principled, egregiously principled, but principled.
Yeah, so in the Married with Children, you notice that everybody in the crowd in that one is white. So this time probably London's already minority white, and here there's almost no one white in the video. But this was today. Claire was in Speaker's Corner talking with some Muslims. They put it up, some over 3,000 views, 2 parts. So here is Zobida El Arabia, and I guess she's also a Speaker's Corner regular. I think so, or maybe just a streamer. I'm not sure if she knows Ralph. That's where I met her the first time, and I think she had Joseph Cohen on, and I watched that. So she sent me the link for kind of these streams about Israel, and then she ended up sending me the link a few times. And so it's interesting. You see her blue eyes there, and I mean, like 1 out of 50 Arabs have blue eyes. Even Palestinians, like 1 out of 50 Palestinians have blue eyes like that. I thought that was interesting. She didn't have her video on when we spoke, but here was the first one I was on earlier this week, the 25th, and you see it was like a 7-hour video, and I was on for a good few hours. And there were some other Jews talking about is Israel an apartheid state, God forbid. So put that in the link if people are interested in like it's a likely move in the Islamic direction. So okay, I was on Ralph. I think he took the stream down, and I actually got clipped by Keith Woods, over 16,000 views. A rabbi explains why Jews in the West support multiculturalism, and that was the one with Joel Davis. So it looks like we got Ralph. So if you just give me like 5 more minutes, I'll finish up.
I just grabbed a coffee, so I'll be in mute for about 5 minutes.
Okay. So yeah, this was on Ralph's stream with Joel Davis came on, and then Keith Woods clipped it to me, kind of explaining the general logic of why Jews support multiculturalism, which was extremely similar to the clip of me. One of my first major things that I got clipped on was my stream with Brundle after Richard Spencer came on, where Vince of Red Elephants came on, and I also said why Jews support multiculturalism. So it was almost me saying the exact same thing. Interesting, he calls me a rabbi. Like, I wanted to be a rabbi, but kind of like a half Jew. So it's not like I'm a rabbi to non-Jews, because generally Jews are pretty strong in ethnocentrism. So it'd be unlikely that Jews would want a half-blooded rabbi. So I'm kind of like a rabbi to Gentiles. So I thought that was interesting that he called me rabbi, because no Jew calls me rabbi. Here's the New York Times article about this new variant in the Omicron, new COVID-19 variant that has people very worried, that's coming out in Africa. So it goes in detail showing the mutations and how it looks on the spike protein. So God forbid, if you see here in the U.S., almost all of COVID-19 in the U.S. that God forbid's been killing more than 1,000 people a day now for months. In the last 4 months, is this new Delta strain, and it's still waging pretty strong. Just Delta in and of itself is a lot to worry about, but the new Omicron strain, so there's worried that it could be like Delta and could get through the vaccine, and it's coming out of South Africa. And so you see the New York Times stream that gives quite a few details on the mutations and exactly what it caused. I showed that video last week that possibly the mutations not only make it more likely to attach to the ACE2 receptor, but make it so it binds and floats in the air and attaches to mucus in a different way. So we've been avoiding talking about COVID-19 too much, but here's just check the New York Times for the latest. That's a big deal. Israel, a lot of these nations are shut down over the fear of what's going on. So Joanna Miller, who I invited to come on the stream, tagged me in this, which is actually from almost February this year, from months ago, about this Japanese supposed brain dream reading machine that unclear exactly how well it works, but it's actually from a few months ago. So if Joanna comes around, she can talk about that. So if Ralph wants to talk about this, he on the stream it was supposed to be talking about this, but kind of just turned into like a yelling match and Donahue show. But he was talking about the religious radicalization and violent extremism, and then I guess the group that Mark Collett is part of, also in a comparative of the process of Islamic radicalization to white nationalist radicalization. So I wanted to look at that maybe from a chunking point of view, so that's actually too large to fit in the chat. Here's the Royal Institution this week. Carl Zimmer, probably one of the most famous virologists in the world, wrote a book on virology, very good graphics. So it was talking about, are viruses alive? Interesting question. My first big debate with JF on evolution, also involved this topic. So Adam Green was on Sula, the Israel, Adam Weinreb in Israel, kind of American party promoter who moved to Israel, served in the army, and is kind of like a leftist trying to talk to Palestinians. And he had Speaking with an Anti-Semite, Adam Green. I helped set this one up. And so if you're interested in that, it was kind of interesting because, Adam and a lot of Israelis are anti-religious, and so no more news. He's not anti-Semitic. He calls
It's
himself
fine, by the way. It just went down for a quick second, but it's back to fine. The screen, just so you know. Okay,
so if it did, I'm sharing the links anyways. So Adam was on Sula, which is, I guess, an Arab word for kind of like a meeting, fire meeting, like campfire meeting, and just talking about his criticisms of Judaism or Torah or beliefs, and Dar trying to question, like, is he going too far? Is he causing unnecessary anti-Semitism? I've shown these books before in the past. Ashish Dalala, who has all these books on cosmology, and so he has a YouTube channel. The last few months, only 295 subs, not too many views. Calls it Shabda Media, and he has a video on the problems with empiricism. He's talking about Descartes and various stuff. Like if we had like a week in review that was more fitting to my likings, it would be trying to reach out and speak to people like this. I mentioned he wrote a book called Godel's Mistake. It was just probably more in line with Jennifer's views. So anyone interested in Vedic cosmology, Ashish Dalala is definitely putting out, quite a few video books on the subject, and started doing regular videos, and that are not that well received. So it is possible maybe he would come on Week in Review. I found this channel. I was looking at a recent video. You remember the game
As
Double
long as you
Dragon?
big us up, remember what Claire said? She's like, you could have bigged me up, I'm not saying you should big up Claire, but you should big up our show. Be like, yeah, it'd be super cool. And then we'll try to be super cool when it happens.
Well, I don't want to walk someone to an ambush. So I mean, we haven't really
That's
came
right.
to some sort of agreement.
Exactly. We should do that beforehand to avoid any problems.
Why?
So
I mean,
it's
that's
just
why I don't
really a
reach out to
misunderstanding of
anybody.
sorts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even reach out to anybody about Week in Review anymore. But I say, like, yeah, I mean, if it was, I mean, I could just invite him to have a chat on my channel and bypass Week in Review. But
whatever you feel most comfortable with is fine by me. I'm just saying, people get the idea that it's their job to undermine my authority. The lowest thing I'll accept is that nothing is said about my authority. If someone wants to say something negative about my authority, that's when you're going to have some problems.
Yeah, so it probably wouldn't work out to have this man on Week in Review, but I might reach out to him just because I enjoyed his books. And
I think it'll be fine as long as it doesn't come to a conversation between the two of us where I am expected to project that I care about his opinion. Nearly impossible for me to do that. If I hear someone's opinion, and my expectation is they want me to correct their mistake, which I get is not the intention people come to me with, but that should be the intention.
Yeah, I doubt it. I mean, I'd say there's almost no chance that guy would come on.
I don't want him to come to me to correct his mistakes. I just want him to understand that I am not open to half-wits and throwaway comments that are denying the thing I just got done saying and took extreme care to express with the best possible language that took me years to come up with. It'd be nice if that was in some small way. I don't care if it's even acknowledged, but not denied, perhaps.
Okay, so I might end up reaching out to him, but I probably won't invite him to a Week in Review. Maybe I'll would possibly have him on my channel just for a chat. You remember the video game Double Dragon?
To be honest, I'm not familiar with many of these games.
It's one of the first kind of like scrolling action video game. And so I was watching some of the videos on this channel, Nostalgia Nerd, on video game computer history, that maybe even Ralph would find that kind of stuff interesting. And so it mentioned the game ending that will disturb you. And I remember I didn't think about it, but the storyline for kind of this game where you just go and beat a bunch of people up from level to level until you beat the game, which there's a whole bunch of video games like Double Dragon.
Sorry about that, chaps.
You remember the video game Double Dragon?
Oh my God, that's going back. Jesus.
Yeah, so it was mentioning
I forgot all about that game.
This channel is kind of interesting because it includes some of the computer programming, the graphical limitations of the time that caused the video games to be programmed in the way they were. But they were mentioning kind of the disturbing ending where it's a 2-player game and, the bad guy, kidnaps the girlfriend. And so if, when you beat the game, like after you beat the final bad guy, the girlfriend drops down and gives the winner a kiss, and, game over, you win. But if you're playing 2 players and both people survive and beat the bad guy, you got to fight each other at the end. And so it was kind of this disturbing. And then the video game has it like no matter which guy wins, the girl comes down and gives a kiss. So
remember, females select for reproduction, right?
Yeah, so it was just interesting that they're covering like the history of these kind of video games. Double Dragon, used to get you to put quarter after quarter in because like you'd lose and you keep on popping quarter.
Hey, Doooovid, do you remember games? Remember when the Commodore 64 had the first 6-bit color? Sorry about this, Jen. But when they went to 6-bit color games briefly before 8-bit color, then you got all these colors like orange and brown, and you got the game Revenge of the Mutant Ninja Camos. Remember that one?
I had the Commodore. I owned a Commodore 64, and in fact,
nice.
This channel had like a whole hour special recently on the history of the Amiga, and I guess the Amiga merged with Commodore. So I thought that was a little bit interesting, like remembering. So let me just finish these real quick. Here was a nice graphical video from Wendover Productions that was trying to explain the current situation of the how ocean shipping and the supply chain crisis. So it kind of follows ships and how the supply chain works and what's currently going wrong. And I saw, like, I went to the drugstore today, and it's like there were a lot of stuff, like even like toothbrushes and other things, like are just out of stock. I shared this with Jennifer. I'm not sure if did you have a chance to watch this? This is a very popular channel, Veritasium. 10 million subs. This had 7 million views, and it's like the big misconception of electricity. And they're trying to say the basic way that they describe electricity is kind of electrons flowing through the wire is being incorrect, and gives some alternative explanation, and kind of like the philosophy of electronics. It was a pretty interesting video. And then EEV blog, the Society of Electrical Engineers, did a reply and analysis of this video. So, like on the philosophy of electricity. So I'll just finish these up. I mean, Jennifer's background physics, if that's interesting to talk about, she had a chance to watch that. Israel, a new poll that almost half of Jewish Israelis support switching to a professional army. That Israel has mandatory military service, obviously, but new possibility that instead of having mandatory military service, that would kind of turn it into a professional paid mercenary army as opposed to a national service, maybe related to some of the stuff we were arguing about. It's called Mossad or mercenaries. Here, New York Times. So Charlottesville was found guilty. Richard Spencer and crew, Jason Kessler, so the SPLC, they were found guilty. $25 million in payments. I'm sure it's like $1 million per group. Roberta Kaplan was on MSNBC today. My sister forwarded me this. I didn't have a chance to start it yet. Is this new CISA, the Scuola International Superior di Studi Avanzati, has a new course on physics and cosmology. And so I'm going to definitely check that out. I'm always sharing these MIT courses, encourage people to keep up with physics. And I mentioned this guy's channel too, kind of also like, we have discussed, like Jennifer, like the kind of just to have like a friendly softball interview conversation with people that would make it interesting to be able to get guests on Week in Review to just give kind of like softball interviews that may might not be the way Jennifer likes doing
We
things.
should give softball interviews, but make it clear to people: do not undermine my authority on my own show. It's unacceptable, period. I don't care who you think you are. That's all. Put it as nicely as you want to, but I got to say, it just... The fact that nobody advocates for me, I have to advocate for myself. If no one's willing to defend me on a principle, that I defend knowledge, you're not really in a position to criticize how I manage the sanctity of the knowledge that I represent.
Nice.
So this is Justin Riddle, and I mentioned him before. He's been putting out videos on orchestrated reduction and microtubules and Hamarov. So he has another recent video on pretty good explanation. I'm just looking here in the video. I'm going to save this one on Aleph Zero. I'm not sure if I've seen that new video on Galois theorem. So with that, that's my Week in Review. I'm not sure if you just want to go to Ralph and do your Week in Review after
I think
Ralph
it's
leaves, or do you
Galois.
want...
Galois.
Good
how you
evening,
say
Jen.
it.
How are you? Shalom, David, and happy Hanukkah and a happy Advent Day. I've been all day busy with church affairs and talking to lots of little old ladies.
Are you going on camera? I guess not.
I'm a bit like sort of shattered today. So I thought
It's
I'd keep
fine
my
if you don't
voice.
want to. I'm going to move the thing over, so it's just Doob.
Okay. Yeah, and that's it. And yeah, I heard David was on and you guys on because I never catch you live because of the time thing. And then David mentioned trunking theory, and David has been on the streams as I've been holding my Nazis versus the Jews shit shows. It's been going really well, except when Mossad shows up at the same time as David, which is problematic. So
The fellow
Other than
Jews
that,
can't decide. Like Mossad wants to take the side of the counter
white
Semites against
nationalists.
me.
Well, I think the funny thing is one of the objectives I was talking to Joseph before is to tell these the Wignats to the Wignat neo-Nazi that the Jews are not a monolith. So I thought between a right-wing nationalist, not that religious, a left-wing Jew, and a global universalist, that they could maybe understand that they're not dealing with, in quotes, the Jews. And that seems to be quite mental. When Doovid was on first, my DMs were lit for about 48 hours, especially as Doovid has some one-liners. Yeah, Doovid has some one-liners that could really annoy
Oh
the
no,
entire.
you didn't. 48
His
hours of lit
his
DMs?
best one-liner was, "Every lip shall confess and all knees shall bend for the Hebrew God of the Bible." And that pretty much had about 2 days worth of DMs going off. It's kind of good one. Good one-liner.
Welcome to the show, Tinkle, and everybody else I haven't had a chance to say hi to. You don't have to say sorry for being late. We like to think of it as an open door policy here.
How you?
Yeah, we discussed it. Was actually interesting, like, Canary's Wharf, because I mean, I'm familiar with the Reichmans, and in fact, one of my local rabbis is Paul Reichman's married Paul Reichman's niece, and I mean, I guess Paul Reichman, a blessed memory. And I was looking at, I guess the Reichmans right now, that Canary's Wharf is majority Muslim owned. That you were showing the demographics, but to get into some of the gist of it and saying, like, well, what do Jews do that's so notable in real estate development? Look at all those buildings that were put up there in London, and saying that was largely done by Jews. And even historically, probably most major cities in the world, that's what we do. That's what we're, one of the things we're most noted for, being landlords. I would say that every Jewish boy in yeshiva wants to grow up and be a landlord. But I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I guess hearing the Londoners' perspective, like all of them were down on Canary's Wharf. Even Ralph seemed kind of down on Canary's Wharf.
Do you know something, David, on that point, though? It's interesting because I lived in the East End for quite a while, and actually the original Jewish community settled the entire East End, the strip and the river leading to Canary Wharf. And then when all the other migrants came and things got very difficult for them, they then moved to like Golders Green and all these areas later. So actually the south by the river is where there's one of the oldest synagogues, at least one that's protected as a building. And there used to be a thing called the Blue Map that dotted every Jewish home from pretty much from Spitalfields all the way to the wharf. And then they kind of left out entirely Bangladeshi Muslim. But so I mean, the Jewish community there, I mean, people say, oh, what is the Jewish community here? There's a real estate, the contributions span the entire European canon. I think some white nationalists have a real difficulty pointing out that Jewish contributions span the entire European canon on almost every subject, right?
The unfortunate karma of Christianity.
Christianity just fine. First day of Advent, we're flying high today, Jen.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need Christian. I mean, so even the Far East, even Bombay, even non-Christian, non-Islamic societies, Jews have also made this real estate development contribution, and not necessarily like we're the builders, but more the financiers and the push behind let's build large buildings into the sky, and collecting together the people, kind of like the predestination and the finance, and then the eventual running of the building, not necessarily the labor to build the building, but it's not necessarily, you could argue that it doesn't have anything to do with the Jewish Christian dynamic, and even in Chinese and Indian cities, Jews have also filled that function of progressing and building towers and landlordship. So do you want to explain?
Do you want to talk about your week in review, or did you have a particular direction you wanted to take the convo with Ralph, Doovid?
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask Ralph, maybe if you want to talk, like, just generally, what is the Speaker's Corner, like the history of it? What would you expect, like, now the factions? I guess I was showing the Married with Children, Al Bundy. I'm not sure if you know the American TV show from the 80s. And, so I remember as a kid, that's the first time I saw Speaker's Corner was in the Married with Children episode. And so you notice in that in the 80s, everyone was white on Speaker's Corner. But what does Speaker's Corner look like today? Are you going to find like Hare Krishna's chanting there? Or you find all the different factions giving speeches and different people? And because I know a lot of these people. Like I was on Zobita's channel a few times, and I saw Claire Kaw was at Speaker's Corner today, and they posted that video talking with Muslims. So like I've noticed quite a few people. Like I had you on my stream, and they're like, "Oh, that's Ralph from Speaker's Corner," and then Zobita El Arabia has been in her channel, and so what Joseph Cohn. So what is this Speaker's Corner? Kind of what's your role in it, and what's the current situation? Like if I was in London
Sure.
and went to Speaker's
Like,
Corner,
I only-
or like if Jennifer was in London, could she just like stand up and start yelling?
Yeah,
preaching
so
on
basically, I
Speaker's
first
Corner
went there
and
to
draw a
school.
crowd?
I went there at high school when I was part of my school debating team. So we used to go there just to practice our debate techniques. And it was very, like you say, representative.
In Hyde Park, I mean, it looks like there's multiple Speaker's Corners, but Hyde Park is the main one.
No, there's only one. So all you're seeing is different camera angles of the same place. It's been the same place for over a century. And I went there first in the late 80s as part of school debating, never went back again until about 2.5 years ago as part of my political mission. I needed a place to land and create this character right reaction. So I entered over there because it proves a couple of things. One, it has a permanent digital presence with 10 to 15 million views a month over a physical presence. So as opposed to just being online or just being physical. And secondly, it represents one of the peak diversity petri dishes. If you wish to experiment on people with data, which is what I do all day, then it's a great petri dish because it represents peak diversity towards a screaming autocratic enforced Tower of Babel. And within that, you've got the large Muslim channels, the Dawa channels, the Christian channels, you've got political channels, you've got cultural channels, you've got individual personalities, and they come together in an increasingly tense, just in the last 2 years, increasingly tense representation of the final state of what we politically see as the final state of global homo, right?
Have you been to Washington Square Park in New York City?
Yeah, I just played chess.
I mean, where Bobby Fischer used to play chess.
A bit of hustling there.
So, I mean, they have musicians there, and they have like little areas. Yeah. And I mean, so Speaker's Corner is like that, where you have little factions. You have people giving speeches and people around, but at the same time, like people will just start listening and interrupting and arguing.
Yeah, the heckle and kibitz.
But it's not just like one person, and there's multiple.
Yeah. But the difference in Speaker's Corner, Washington Square Park is just organic in New York, right? Speaker's Corner is protected so all the parks are protected by auxiliary legislation, royal parks legislation. So it's protected by royal parks legislation.
Is there chess there also? Do people
people can play chess, but there's a better place to play chess, a different park by the opera stuff. Nicer place to play chess than Speaker's Corner. Some people bring their boards there. But the real chess players don't play there. It's too many people shouting. And then within Speaker's Corner, everyone from Marx, Angela Merkel, Wittgenstein, everyone has been to Speaker's Corner. The Speaker's Corner is a place where it doesn't matter how clever you are, you're going to get heckled down by professional hecklers. Or if you have a cause, that's your place to die on the hill. So the Speaker's on the hill. It's quite flat, obviously. So that's a good place. I went there first. I had no political history or digital history before that. I went there for political mission. And that's going to come to its end now at the phase of the mission. And it was a great place to watch this. And when you see like Zubida, you see all the other channels, all the other ones, it's like permanent internet blood sports. And it basically reflects in many ways the diversity and intensity of demographics. So the Muslims people are there just on the Dawa channel, or the Jewish people go down there to kind of oversee the other two Abrahamic faiths, like do their thing. There's political black versus white, classes, women's rights, trans rights. It's the whole affair. And increasingly, it's got a little more physical. So we're trying to stab Hatun in the face because she was punching holes in the Quran.
But you're saying it worked for you. You went from someone who didn't have like a public persona to someone to tens, hundreds of thousands of people know who you are, and even IRL that some of the big players and politics would be like, oh, I know that guy, so I'm at Speaker's Corner. Like,
in the UK, I'm probably a lot more known, right? Yeah, because my largest single Twitter thing was 750,000 views when I wore White Lives Matters.
There's millions of people in London, but you're saying like tens of thousands of people have
it's like a hub network. It's like a spoken hub network. So now politicians will increasingly go there. All the protest movements go through there. But across history, if you plot the history, there used to be a gallows and there was to hang people.
And your opposition. So I'm saying, like, if Church of Entropy, was in London and set up in Speaker's Corner every day for a few weeks, that eventually
She'll get hassled. She'll get hot. Eventually, Jen, if you stood up there, you're going to get hassled by some physics geeks, right?
Oh yeah,
Because they're
that's
not very-
likely. You know
Yeah,
what?
because
You know
it's not
how
right.
long the people around here have been looking
It
for
doesn't matter
someone
what
in
topic, you're
physics.
going to get hassled by someone's
You
going to
know how
hustle.
long they've been looking for someone in physics to come and show me what's what and BTFO me? They're
But no,
they're
I'm
the
thinking physically
cumers.
now.
Okay, the people who think that a physicist is going to BTFO me, that's the cumers of anti-me. That's the literally most out to lunch people that thinks a
Yeah, but you
physicist is
literally
going to
there, you
put
will
their
find people who-
reputation on the line to debate me
But
about
there are people
something
there, like I think,
that
what's his name?
uncontested.
Bruce-
My interpretations are really hard to argue against. Not sure if you realize that yet.
I
Val.
think either Deutsch or Penrose people have been through. There's always going to be like PhD physics types there, but it doesn't matter what topic you're into. There's going to be if you're a flat earther, if you're a conspiracy theorist, if you're the Hebrew Israelites are particularly noisy.
Well, it's like Union Square or Washington Square Park in New York, where there's just tens of thousands of people foot traffic through there. That any moron, like in the Married with Children episode, like any crazy person who just starts speaking is going to gather like a little bit of a crowd, and like people are tourists, they don't know who's who, so you could just be listening to some crazy person for a few minutes
just a
until you
person goes
realize
through-
you're listening to some crazy person.
Yeah, there's crazy people. There's one guy just sits there just chanting the same song again and again and again, an African folk song. That's all he does. He doesn't speak. He just gets up and he sings and chants nonstop. Then there's serious people come through, like I say, Wittgenstein, Marx, all of them have spoken there. And then there's
I mean,
that's
it's
what
historic
so
where you're saying
streams-
the great minds of I mean, it's not like the Oxford Union or something with debate, but it is somewhat like the Oxford Union. Say, like the fact is, no, most of the great personalities
some of them will go through
of
right?
London did give speeches in
So
speakers.
who is last that you would know from the American All Right? So who would I spoke last? You know, Aaron Raw went through it recently, like last year, something, right? So
I mean,
if you
would
see-
alt writers like I don't know, like Greg Johnson or something show up there?
No, he wouldn't go. He wouldn't be able to handle the enrichment, right? But Aaron Raw from the skeptic community, the atheist, Aaron Raw was there last year. So right, those kind of people will fly through. So for me, anyway, if you look at your involvement, you suddenly see half these people, they know each other. Zubida represents one fragment of the Muslim camp, as Speaker's Corner, and because she's very physical, she's confronted Tommy Robinson, she's gone to running street battles, physical battles. She's quite energetic. She represents one part of them. We're supposed to say the Dawa channels, where you're going to go there and try to educate I don't know, Hamza on why philosophically the A and B series of time means the resolution of the sniper problem has a resolution in philosophy. Right? So you go to one set of channels with that kind of stuff. You go to Zubida's for some blubbing. It is basically.
I'm really
like you
having
say,
trouble following the thread of literally anything that you're saying, and it's really a shame just to answer, not answer, but comment on what Parmendi said in the chat. Who does know a little bit due to participating in the Wolfram streams? You know, we should give him a break. You know, he's probably, and I mean this in a good way, delicate genius. These types, I know, because I am one in my own way. Like we have cyclic tendencies. You know, this whole doing a show once a week thing is not my standard operating or modus operandi or whatever you want to call it. This is something that, you know, it's good to have to put a little bit of order and otherwise a highly disordered thing. So I'm just saying, you know, whatever he manages to put out, if it's for a couple weeks, he's putting a ton out and then he takes a break for a couple months, we should just appreciate whenever he manages to do it, because that's tough work. I gotta say, I don't envy him and his willingness to put his heart out there. That's admirable.
To take it out of Speaker's Corner, I think Doovid wanted to talk about, because I don't want to hijack and show anything.
But
about
for the audience, I mean,
Tonking
I
theory,
know
I think
Jennifer was
you
going to find it completely uninteresting, but I mean, I thought it'd be interesting to the audience. Like, what is this phenomenon in Speaker's Corner in London? I was telling Jennifer, I'm kind of like working through your network, and you know, most of this network I say is really the Speaker's Corner network. These are people who are familiar with you from Speaker's Corner, and you know, people like Paul Rimmer.
Well, Speaker's
Joseph
Corner and
Cohn.
my journeys to the alt-right as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, you have your other network that I guess is pan-European, but you know, saying that a lot of these Muslims I've seen that it's like, oh, Ralph from Speaker's Corner, and now I've probably spoken to 20, 25 people that are, you know, regulars at Speaker's Corner.
Absolutely, I think most of you would have seen intersecting on some of those streams and not Speaker's Corner, Zubida, etc. Are listed. I don't necessarily want to point all of the names, are actually physically at Speaker's Corner with histories of videos and stuff like that. I don't know how many videos are made of me at Speaker's Corner, but there are probably enough of them at this point.
It's like street musicians. I was thinking like Washington Square Park, where it's more musicians,
No.
but you got to get there early and get your spot, or you have a reserved spot.
Speakers Corner is no
Where it's not
musician.
like legally but you know that there's certain people that have had spots for years and set up there like basically daily. It's going to be them. That's their spot.
Yeah, these guys have been coming there for 20 years, but there's no music, there's nothing else. It's just flow through traffic because it's the edge of Hyde Park. So it's a huge park, and it's at the entrance of Mall Lodge. But there's no music, dogs, anything. It's meant to be just for the speakers to harass each other. That's basically it. But you mentioned chunking theory, which might get Jennifer back in the conversation. I feel a bit
Specifically, yeah, I mean, because when you were talking about the radicalization, I was mentioning, say, okay, like a lot of theories of consciousness is, the consciousness is a prediction machine and some sort of, consciousness largely acting in a person's own self-interest, whether we know it or not, and trying to predict a world that's going to provide the best outcomes for the person. And then if you look at the radicalization process, like I mean, it might even be ways to test it. If you just gave people selected pieces of information, that the conclusion might be more likely, like a multiple truth hypothesis, where you could draw countless different conclusions, and the evidence, some of the evidence will strongly support the conclusions, some of the evidence will go against the conclusions, some of the evidence will be neutral, some of the evidence supports multiple conclusions, hence the multiple truth hypothesis. But in terms of the radicalization process, that if you just focus on giving people certain chunks of information, that's likely to draw certain conclusions from it, like like great replacement, demographic change, immigration, if it's Jewish involvement or something in it, and that so the radicalization process is somewhat of a chunking technique where people purposely feed certain pieces of information, and then based on that information, the people draw these logical conclusions from the information that is, like radicalization, that there's a problem and we have to do something about it. And if you're trying to de-radicalize the person, then it's like, the cognitive dissonance, where you have to feed them a larger picture and a larger frame of, like, yes, you have these pieces of information, and yes, based on these pieces of information that you have, that maybe quite a few of them are correct and objectively true, and based on just them would draw you to this logical conclusion, but yet there's these larger pieces of information, and if it's something like Canary's Wharf, and just Jennifer, anybody's watching Canary's Wharf, I guess the other side of the river Thames, and is it the Thames River that runs through London?
Thames, yeah.
Thames, that was largely unbuilt up, and then in the 90s, Paul Reichman, who was, I think, based out of Toronto, he was at one point the wealthiest man in the world, although went bankrupt, and did one of the largest real estate construction projects in the history of the world, which was building like 20 skyscrapers to completely develop a commercial new center there. And but from a like the alt-right perspective or demographic great replacement change, saying, well, that was a historically ethnic, somewhat white neighborhood that is now mostly Islamic, multicultural, in this new kind of if you want to call it global homo. But how you, if you're looking at from that, okay, London is moving ahead, but it's not moving ahead from them. And how you would chunk that pieces of information, that anyone in London probably saw those buildings going up, and from someone's perspective, I thought that was pretty cool. I remember in Jerusalem when I first heard about Paul Reichman, I was like, oh, you didn't know that the richest person in the world is an Orthodox Jew? And when I was in Jerusalem, Paul Reichman was still possibly the richest person in the world. That was before the internet boom and Bill Gates. But if you're thinking about it from a Londoner's perspective, that actually was part of the cause of this demographic change, that they built up this huge urban center that was largely going to be filled by immigrants and in global business.
Yeah, I think so. I think a bit different thesis to address that. But yeah, you're right in the sense of the old school view of chunking theory, which we would use in things like chess. And we know that there's particulars involved with consciousness, but we know we're way past chunking theory in per se, because we have obviously co-op. But I think there's two things for me. One is, what is the mechanism of this experiment one performs? And let's say just your conversation the last few weeks in the panels is the correct approach we know from complex systems is the way to look at how graphs form for channels, all sorts of communities, is they're social homophilic graphs, right? So they basically have two dimensions of operation, a status homophily and a value homophily. So if I say the status is Jewish, religious, male, female, young, old, Brit, yang, and your value group is going to give you identity theory, then very, very quickly we can see we've got only 3 or 4 classes of topologies that arrives from the emergent phenomenon of putting people together under different conditions. So what I do is tend to put these people in. Then when you say chunking, that for me in the new world is the perturbation of the graph. Given that we have a collection of people, say on this stream right now, or the one you were with Zubida, if I wanted to model them formally and properly, I would give them status values and I'd give them the node valuation function for the rest of the graph. Then they would be interacting, so they'd be forming a kind of n-dimensional surface. And then any changes that form the cluster, break the cluster, sustain the cluster, a Hindu concept, obviously, and those would be applicable, like you say, to perturbations more than chunking, where I would just say, and like simple example, the presence of 3 Jews or 2 Jews on the panel facing off a horde of white nationalists, just the fact that you guys had different views was immediately clustering them differently, right? So I think that's a more modern or valuable way to look at those things to do if you were doing such things.
So it turned into a dumpster fire because they were clustering things in a different way.
Yeah, literally, they saw Jews as a monolith, as a class. From their cluster, they looked at Jews as an unopaque cluster of just Jewishness. And then soon as they realized that there were nodes inside this cluster, they had to adapt themselves, trying to work out, is it Doovid I support or is it Mossad I support? Do I like Mossad? Do I like Doovid? And that perturbation, if you like, alters their status value kind of shape, if you like. Their base, and you get this stuff easily, Jen. It's a surface, right? And it impacts their surfaces. And then they kind of have a bit of energy going around to sustain it, right? And then you watch what happens. So that interests me a lot. That's how I think information models work. But now to go back to the
I was trying to define on a
stuff.
simple level just how we define the we. And so, if it's just a simple the us versus them, the whites versus the non-whites,
Yeah, so it's basically
the
just
Jews,
status
and then saying that we is
it's a function of
it's a
function of
changing
status
concept. Who is the we? How do you define the we?
Oh yeah, so that's
Are
very
there
easy.
different we's? You could define a we that includes me and anybody, and then you could change the we and switch it around. And so that's kind of what's happening on your stream, and then also like the chunking of just the pieces of information. If you give people just a handful piece of information,
word, right? But I mean, the I and the we is simple. If I was doing it in maths, right, and doing it in graph theory, the status homophily gives you your individual identity, the identity of a node. How old are you? And this identity can be morphing, right? At any point, it can have different status values over time. And you're just saying, okay, I'm single, I'm a male, I'm female, I'm religious, I'm not. And then the group, the value is bonding the wee bit, and the wee bit is operating under the dynamics of the maths of rewarding status or moving to it. So your tribe, your ethnicity, your religion, your nationality, your gender are group identities that emerge as a function of a valuation function applied on a node. So if, for example, I'm male and I walk into a feminist group online, I'm immediately going to have the status value M, and let's say 83% of them have status value F, so my value is going to intrinsically be low. And then the other thing you have to know is the temporal function says, how does both status and value interoperate in an emergent adaptive fashion over stimuli, which we could imagine as a graph perturbation. So over perturbation of those values, what is the temporal flow? And it looks like that complex adaptive system seems to fall into finite sets of discernible patterns that cover most patterns. Education notwithstanding, for example, there are only 3 types of topologies that emerge in these streams, live streams, groups, comment section. Either they're perfect homophilic structure, basically echo chambers, or they represent the village square, the town hall, which is everyone screaming for each other's attention, or they end up with a balanced heterophilic function, like the Supreme Court, or a debate in the Oxford Union. And once you realize it doesn't matter what energy perturbations other than edge cases, all these seem to show up the same sort of way. They seem to become one of these 2 things, right? You go into a politically provoked debate or a Discord debate, right? T-Jump server, where you have N voices screaming to form a mesh of competing values as opposed to a structured debate.
A mesh of competing values?
Correct, because the value function as opposed to the status function is the value function is the V is the connectivity topology.
You
How
really
many
think
people
that
get
in
the-
utilizing this jargon is going to make me listen more to your point or accept your authority, which is what you appear to be after?
It doesn't matter if you do it or not. It's not my point that matters. It's just the maths being used by all big data corporations today. Whether we like it or you like
You
it.
can
makes
just
it-
skip the whole putting it into math terms thing, unless you're doing that for Doovid exclusively. Don't do it on.
Well, I think David likes maths. I don't know, but I mean, so if you imagine just his nose and graphs.
I
then
feel
think-
like Doovid doesn't quite like math as much as I do, but he respects it. Like,
So
for
do you
example,
like
he's one of
maths?
the few people that if I say, what's a derivative of x cubed, his jaw's not going to drop to the table and I'm going to get an embarrassed silence. He's actually going to throw the 3x squared down. Like a gangster, basically, but in a good way, obviously. No,
Jen, have you ever
bad
asked people
intonation.
if they know how, if they remember how to do long division by hand?
See, that would be that would be verging on pedantry. And the
Yeah,
thing is, there's a
pretty
time and a
much.
place, and the time and a place to enjoy it is with other pedantic people, pedants, as it were.
Well, I always like math or logic puzzles, because that's like my granddad, of blessed memory. When we were together, like we would do math or logic puzzles, or even till this time, like just like want a nice puzzle, I could play chess, sharpen the mind, or to look at things in more analytical, representational terms, pattern recognition. And then, like if you're talking streaming, like in terms of audiences, like most popular, probably like violence, then sex, then conflict of some sort, expertise, because expertise is limited, so conversation among experts is not interesting to anybody other than experts. So either you have conversation among experts that is knowingly not meant for the masses and would not be interesting to anybody else, or if you have conversation for among experts that's meant to impress the masses, or like a teaching type experience, like you two could one day be an expert. And then if you think the stream, if it's like, okay, people want to see some sort of progress in like a biblical type, like eventually all peoples are going to get along and work in harmony, but there's conflict, so you put two natural things of conflict, like the Jerry Springer Donahue, like white nationalists and Jews, or blacks and racist whites, and so conflict or violence is expected. And so that's people they want to see, like Jerry chant Jerry after the violence breaks out, but also some sort of like we're making progress towards a better world, that two people in a natural state of conflict were able to find some sort of common ground and understanding. That could be saying like, okay, even though like, okay, like I'm a multiculturalist, pro-immigration Jew, and these guys are white nationalists, that there's still many points of
Agreement.
and then it's even like, but Jews, here's this Israeli that's a nationalist and completely in agreement with these European nationalists versus the American nationalists. They want to find common ground. They want this Israeli Jew to convince me that I'm wrong. Like, why are you pushing immigration and multiculturalism? Here's this Israeli Jew to tell you that has nothing to do with Judaism, and a lot of it's like scripted. So if it's like politically provoked or something like that, or like Luke Ford, or even Claire, where are they really trying to push forward progress, or are they just trying to build up like prestige, cult, a cult following, or just make some money by having a form of entertainment? I mean, God forbid it's like like action movies or pornography. So your average person doesn't want to watch just like straight pornography where it goes straight into the triple X scenes. They want like a storyline and a little bit of romance, and then it has like the R movie that has like a storyline and a plot, or like an action movie where it's not just like all straight violence. You're not just watching like best gore episode after episode. It's like a storyline that has a culmination. So most seekers on the internet, they want the one-liners. People tune in for the arguments, the zingers, and then that's the entertainment, and then like some little like feel good, like I told Roseanne on Root and Branch, that like the American sitcom where there's some sort of conflict resolution, and like, we're dealing with the basic traumas that everyone deals with, but at the end,
It's a
everybody
happy
loves
ending.
each other and gets along, and we survived and passed the test, and everyone.
You know what, David? Exactly what you're
Can I
saying
just
right now.
hop in real quick before you
Go ahead.
bloviate for, I'm sure, a very long time? Parmenides asked, the transforms quantized homeomorphism. Yeah, I don't really think homeomorphism is the right term. That's too general, because if the coffee cup is homeomorphic to correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, but if it's homeomorphic to a circle, that's not. I mean, it's almost a literal linear transformation. It just can't be described as linear transformation because they're not functionals, they're relationals. Like the 3+1, that shape, the apple shape, the invert or the complement of the hyperbolic figure eight, third least complex knot. Yeah, that's not a functional, it's a relational because it has repeating values basically. There's no reason why you shouldn't think there would be repeating values of the variables. It's just really a naming convention that's problematic. So it would be some type of a continuous deformation of that. I've called it, something. It's basically morphogenic resonance, which was somewhat of a troll due to being in a debate and basically baiting somebody's technique. I do sometimes. I'll use a very obscure term that essentially has no consensus on definition intentionally, but I won't misuse it. So there's basically no argument against that. So it's in this gray area where it's kind of like when you can trick someone into arguing against a negative almost, but better. Anyway, so it's quantized. So basically there's a step of quantization which you could describe it as a crystallization. So you add a little crystal like the top of a mushroom, a cap on a mushroom. Once that is sufficiently there, it'll sort of ricochet against the cap and continue to grow the cap, as well as fill whatever chamber of the pump is predicted to be filled based on whether it's going against gravity or with gravity, right? Because the apple is going with it, mushroom's going against it. Yeah, sorry about that digression, but I kind of was hoping we could stick to just meta-analysis rather than Ralph pretending he understands math, which we've all been through many times and no one's convinced.
Okay, I don't think we've ever spoken about maths, but I'll let the insult slide. But you know what, David, it's exactly what you said there, right? So if you look at the only three topologies that surface from those things, and imagine the alt-right and the left being in echo chambers, right? Blue's a red bubble. So 90% of the nodes are connected to the same node types. And when you come into what you've been doing with the panels, you're in that middle curve, that middle topology. Clusters of white nationalists, clusters of audience, clusters of Jews. And the objective, like you said, towards the better world would be the mainstreaming, the de-radicalization, the exit, the clusters on the left topologies into the ones on the right. The right is normalization right at the end. But that's where you get the most balanced views.
Agree to disagree. Like I was telling Zobita, like, okay, we're gonna have to agree to disagree about Jesus and Muhammad, or if it's white, we're gonna have to agree to disagree about multiculturalism and immigration. And if we could move on, so okay, we agree to disagree about this, that we would see we still agree about hundreds, thousands of different issues, and that so if you put it in, like, chunk it in a certain way, they say like, no, we're not going to agree to disagree about multiculturalism and immigration, and you are my enemy, and I have to do something about you because because it's impossible for us to agree to disagree about this issue. And you'll move to the heterophily point where you say, okay, we agree to disagree about this, and then recognize all these other various issues we agree about.
And I think that process is different as well, because that's now psychological and psycho-spiritual, right? So then there's a question of, independent of all of that stuff, is how do you get people to change their minds? And the best knowledge we have of this, the longest studies and data, of course, is from the cognitive behavioral therapy, right?
I was saying you don't have to get them changed. So you can just get them to
agree
to disagree about what we. I'm not even saying that
their wires, right?
Some sort of agree to disagree, and then move on to other topics you agree about, as opposed to trying to force the person to change their mind about a given issue. You're saying you have to focus that, like, you accept that you're wrong on this issue, and so that's not necessarily my approach. Let's agree to disagree on this issue, and then move on to other issues. Did we lose Ralph there?
No, sorry, I think I've got a bit of a spotty thing. But no, I'm just saying, if you look also at changing someone's mind, the process we know that works the most from cognitive behavioral, if you want to stop someone being an addict, an alcoholic, beating their wife, being a kleptomaniac, how do we change people's minds? That process is really well understood for about, almost 60, 70 years. They need to go through 3 kind of stages of transformation. We know that because we know the cognitive behavioral literature tells us what the success rates and clinical outcomes for people who were transformed. So transformation itself is a reasonably well understood subject in CBT, right? So if I want to change someone's mind, it has to go through the RWA pipeline. They've got to be ready, then willing and able. And if you look at all the clinical studies by outcomes in medicine, they'll say, for example, here's not a well-known fact. 85 to 90% of people, if they don't make a 30-day transformation cycle, they fail. It seems like around 28 days seems to be a massive number. In the number of days, you've got to take contiguous days before you can have a transformational behavior, be it kleptomania, beating your wife, drinking, whatever kind of trait you're trying to change. It looks like the human consciousness seems to go through 3 stages before it will either fall back and reoffend, if you like, or hasn't been completely transformative, or to go through the stages, then and only then do you have transformative behavior.
Wouldn't you
So
rather
once you
have
understand
something that didn't regress at all?
Well, I think it varies it varies a lot by the type of thing, et cetera, but they've got solid data on smoking, addiction, crime, all sorts of things that says it looks at the human consciousness. If we wanted to stop smoking or change some habits, start running, it seems like it needs to go through these kind of 3 kind of modes of humanity, right? Like psychological modes, if you like. Right? Are you ready? Are you willing? And are you able? If you're not ready, there's no point trying to make me stop smoking if I'm not ready to smoke. Then even I might be willing, I might not be able. And even after I'm able, I have to go through a period before I won't just naturally go backwards.
Yeah, I mean, the
So changing
Kabbalists
people's
have
minds,
the
right?
process, threefold process similar to the Alcoholics Anonymous. First, there's some sort of acknowledgement that there's a problem. Then you have to remove yourself from the scenario, and then has the transformation to where then you could re-enter your previous scenarios without the problem. So it's like alcohol that first, okay, there's a problem. So you have to stop going to the bars or the places or get rid of the alcohol. And then you have the internal transformation. And then you could go back, and it follows the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey of the person that I mentioned in the chants or the songs, that most songs follow kind of hero journey's path, where the person is in the regular daily life and recognizing the problems of society, and then they have to withdraw from society to get this special wisdom. And then once they receive the special wisdom, they're able to re-enter society and change it.
Transformed, if you like literally transformed in a psychological sense. They have changed their form. They're no longer, for example, an addict or whatever.
Related to music theory, but the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey.
Sounds about right. So even these processes, all these conversation streams is quite interesting. There's all the maths we now know and stuff, and the data side of graphs and social structures. But then there's the individual psyche that has to also evolve through it, right? So a great example is Elron the German. Suddenly all the DMs that go after your presence are all saying, I think I like the Mozart guy. I think I agree with him and not Doooovid. So you can see him going through a transformational process, right? Right, which may or may not stay. It would depend on how much contact, but you can see it seems like primates are pliable in a sense, right? Pliable, they can be moved through structured processes.
Only if you're operating in a Hegelian dialectic, i.e. a controlled dialectic, not objectively or absolutely, whatever you want to call it.
#dollar.
So your whole thing is predicated on being able to completely control the parameters of the conversation. How likely do you think that is?
No, absolutely. I don't think there's no tried and tested methods. There's not going to be any.
Not to mention this notion that people can change their beliefs. Where the hell does this come from?
I think people change their beliefs a lot, right?
I don't even think people can actually necessarily know the contents of their beliefs. I think people can know the correlates of their beliefs, and they can model their beliefs accurately. But I don't think, it may be even possible to prove that we can't, quote, know the contents of our thoughts, or that may not even make sense and may be a proposition that violates the least action principle in some manner.
Yeah, for me, the problem obviously is, for my discipline is that what is the shape of that descriptor in the first place?
The
Like, how do I
problem for me
describe
is that
what's what I write it
the
down as?
Platonics want to take the idea that not knowing something is a reason for just guessing.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that. But no, it's funny because I was tired today. Lots and lots of old ladies to speak to for most of the afternoon and evening. But I thought, before I saw you live, I thought, I'm bored. Should I jump on there? There's a Muslim metaphysics panel with a lot of interesting guys, and basically all of their metaphysics, everything they're arguing about, about things like A and C, B series of time and stuff. But in a funny way, all their metaphysics is only there to confirm their bias that Allah exists. Right? This is it. So you look at it at one level, you see this whole really interesting nuanced discussions, but its raison d'etre, nevertheless, is just to affirm the Kalam argument or something like that, right? So you can see
Which
that
is
people
predicated
already
on a fallacy, right? Which I constantly come back to in these conversations, that
Yeah,
always
because
the Big Bang, it's predicated on the same fallacy as the Big Bang.
what fallacy is that one?
You don't know what the Kalam argument is?
Oh, I know the
Why don't-
Kalam. Sorry, I mean it's predicated on a fallacy. I mean, which fallacy is
Well,
it predicated?
why
on
don't you
the Kalam?
assert the argument then, and I'll point the fallacy out.
Oh, there's a contingent being. All contingents need a necessary thing. Therefore, there's a necessary. I haven't done the steps of the Kalam for quite a while. Which bit is wrong with the Kalam? I'm not a big Kalam proponent or anything like that.
Well, it wasn't presented to me in terms of necessity and contingency. It was presented in terms of a cause thing. Anything that begins to exist has a cause.
Okay,
The
so you
universe
did that.
began
Everything
to
begins
exist,
as a
therefore
cause,
the
and
universe
yeah.
has a cause. That's
Okay,
what I
so
thought it
just-
was. Now, if you're telling me I've been presented as straw man,
No, that's
That's
fine. That's
fun.
it. That's one way to express. There are many ways to express the Kalam, but that's one of the ways it's gone. So which whatever begins to exist has a cause. Is
Right,
that your
so-
problem on this one?
the fallacy is on. I mean, that argument is actually fine, but the fallacy is applying it to the universe with the assumption that it began to exist.
Premise two.
There's no basis to presume that.
So basically, there's no time. Time could be either infinite or depending if you have A or B series with the time. But I think there's a problem even in premise one, isn't there? 'Cause whatever
Everything that begins to
exist-
exist has a cause. Actually, no. That is how you tell that something is temporary if it has a beginning. Because if something has a beginning, it also has an end. Because the first thing we can, like the ground of stuffness, in the sense of discernment, is a boundary.
Yeah, but whatever begins to exist has a cause because that's assuming
And
there can be
the point
nothing
is that boundaries begin to exist just like bubbles. Like a bubble didn't always exist. The sphere that animates the bubble always existed, but you instantiated the bubble pure.
Like I say,
by
it's been a
blowing it.
long day of admin, but don't you run into the problem with premise one that it says, therefore, you must
No.
accept one of the two variations of the PSR, and therefore, if you're a theologian, then that almost implies necessitarianism, right? You have to almost imply, therefore, God had to create the universe.
I'm talking about simple necessity here. If
Oh, just
everything that
necessity.
begins to exist has a cause, and A began to exist, then it does follow that A had a cause. That's just what you call
That-
syllogism,
okay.
very basic thing.
But for you, it's the physics one, right? You
That
don't
has
like-
nothing to do with the PSR, as far as I understand.
No, but I'm talking about, well, actually kind of does, but I'm talking, your problem is the second step, though, right? Your problem is the universe beginning to exist, right?
Yeah, there's absolutely no basis to conclude that. That is presuming the conclusion.
Yeah, like I say, I'm not. I to be honest between you and me, I get a bit bored, and computer scientists get a bit bored of philosophy. Philosophers just like to speak about these things nonstop, right? I mean, it's almost like they like the word contingent and entailment. It probably gives them a little brain dopamine burst or something. I have no idea what it is.
Well,
I mean, when
perhaps
I
it's
was
the fact that the
16
ancient religion has debates as the backbone of the practice.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I guess it depends what people float their boat, whatever. I mean, when I was 16 and 18, I was super into all of that. But now I'm just like, what is the point? I mean, you're not going to really give us any more knowledge that's already not contained within the bigger questions, right?
I
Questions.
disagree, obviously.
That's okay. Disagreement's
Well,
fine.
I think you'd probably disagree as well if you had any knowledge of what I was talking about, which apparently you don't.
Okay, what was that? Which bit?
Well, what does it matter? If you haven't figured it out by now, you're not interested.
No, the Kalam, like I said, I'm sorry, the Kalam arguments and philosophy and all that stuff doesn't interest me. I thought the second bit was maybe where you were going to tell us something interesting or something I would not know, which is the universe bit, right? The began to exist bit, right?
Well, sure. The fallacy is in applying the argument to the universe. It's not itself a fallacious argument. It's a valid argument, but not sound when applied to the universe, I guess.
You just reject premise too, right? You just reject the universe began to exist.
I reject that the universe had a beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not a problem with the argument, I suppose. It's a problem with the interpretation, I suppose.
No, I guess for the Kalam, it doesn't make a difference, right? Because it's a premise anyway, right? So you have to assert the premise. The rest of
well, the problem is that the conclusion is God is an uncreated first creator, and the premise is that an uncreated first creator can't exist. So it's a bit of a self-refuting argument in a way, on top of the problem initially of it.
I think the Abrahamic people like to use the Kalam, for example, are probably going to have hours having fun with Genesis, right?
So I had a question for Parmenides. I don't know if you know anything about this, or if you can pass this on to the topology guys, because I'm sure as heck pretty lost on this stuff and don't really have a mind for it. So is there a domain that defines cutting these things? So this is the complement of a knot, and I want to cut it in the middle, and I want to know if the result is going to be a sphere, because I think it ought to be. Just want to make sure. Like S2, obviously. That's all I want to say. So did you get any new insights, Ralph, in terms of all this wonderful knowledge that you hold?
No, to be honest, I listened to a little bit for these metaphors. I mean, maybe it's just where I am and what I'm doing is much more exciting. I get bored of listening to philosophy arguments for a while because I just can't map any of them to be of any high value to me personally. Just speaking for myself, whether it's this series of time, whether something deterministic, and they all just seem to me as classes of algorithms that have marginal interest to what I do. So I can look at them sometimes because they're interesting. So I like some people's voices, right? I like Alex Malpass, for example, stuff like that. But I'm not a big, when I was much younger, I was into philosophy much more. Because, but now I'm just not that. Do you know? Are you a philosophy person, Jen? Are you?
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember once in university, my buddy was dating this woman, and it's always a crapshoot, right? When your buddy gets a girlfriend.
Yeah. Yeah, that dynamic, right? Yeah.
Well, there's so few women in physics, right? And so the ones that are there, like this woman kind of reminded me of, I think the character's name is Linus, the one on Charlie Brown that's got like little bugs flying around it. I swear I'm getting to a point, but do you know what I'm talking about? Hello?
No, Linus from what, Peanuts or something?
I don't even remember. I thought it was Charlie Brown, but maybe I'm
wrong.
Charlie
Brown, right? Peanuts,
the one that's got the little bugs flying around. She had, the whole 9 yards. And I'm not anti dreads, like some of my best friends have dreads, but if you can't keep it clean, you know what I'm saying? Back to the point. So I'm such a philosopher that when I left the room for a couple minutes, probably go to the washroom upstairs. I can't remember. Maybe I was having a combo in another room, and this girl that was, I don't know. I don't want to say they were dating. Maybe she was quasi-orbiting him or something. And I was coming out, and I was in a really good mood because we were playing Risk or something. I can't remember. But anyway, I came down the stairs, and she's like, "Le philosophe," which means the philosopher. So it means that I've been annoyingly pedantic, if you will, on certain subjects since a while. You know what I used to say back in the second year university? The mind is a quantum computer. Those are good times.
The mind is a quantum computer, right? So,
yeah.
So it's basically all Quar before its time then, right?
It was which? I'm sorry, but those guys came up with that idea way before, probably even before I was born. I don't want to say before I was born, but I don't want to take that away from him.
What do you think? What do you guys think? I'll be bailing soon. What do you think of Al-Quar? Do you think it's going to be refuted or?
Oh, he's on the right track, but he's still essentially locating. He's trying to isolate. Why would you try to isolate, or whatever you want to call the creatrix or whatever that's going to be called? Like, why would you Like, what's the flaw to the philosophers? Because theoretically, philosophy shouldn't be like that. It should be a progression of knowing more, not being perpetually confused.
I
What's
think
the
the
problem, right?
fundamental problem. I think
The
the
problem
fundamental
is you got to pose the question correctly.
Yeah, I think the fundamental problem for that Okwa shows up is that when I remember the early AI movement in the late 80s and stuff, the precursors to the AI stuff, and we always assumed in the late 80s, early 90s that by extension, eventually, theoretically, consciousness would emerge as some function of neural connectivity. And now it
Presumptions
just looks
based
like
on
it just
what?
it
Based
just
on
looks like
what?
it won't. No, because at that point we were very excited in the late 80s and 90s because we finally knew we could model things like coherent networks to do things like detect heavy and light consonant resonance that mapped to brain signals and stuff like that. We thought, oh, it looked like consciousness would show up eventually 20, 30 years as a function of neural connectivity. Now we almost definitely know it's not. So then the question is, not
it's like this
OKR, it's going
constant
to be
wishful
something
thinking.
else.
The constant wishful thinking, like, oh, in 20 or 30 years we'll get it.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's like, it reminds me of the trip to Mars and the nuclear fusion plant.
Well, now I think it's going to be very different because I think we now have closed a lot of the gaps. So that's why what's exciting is between OKR and constructive theory. Somewhere in there is the bits.
Are
that
you
will
really
either
telling me the
trust me-
size of the unknown? You know, when people say God of the gaps, what the F are they talking about? Let's say they're talking about the size of the subjectively perceived hole in wisdom. Has the gap left by God really actually been closed? I would argue not so much.
Between you and me, I would argue, if so, a very tiny amount, absolutely. But that's different from the other bit of whether the description of consciousness, it looks like it's never going to be a description of a connectivity of neurons.
Well, the neurons are going to have something to do with it, just like the DNA is going to have something to do with it. It's just a question of what.
But it won't be
How the
premised.
ordering, how does it emerge from the ordering principle? That's what you got to answer. So someone in the chat is asking, is that a picture of a sphere turned inside out? It's not a sphere turned inside out. So basically, if you know what S2 is, that's the boundary of a sphere. So S2 is to R3 what this object is to R4. Okay, so R4 is the next level abstraction Euclideanly, but actually this uses the hyperbolic axioms, which are still what you could argue broadly mathematical axioms, aka dealing with metrics, distance, in a extremely big tent sense.
But for me, a more interesting challenge is going to be, suppose some future version of something that OKR plus constructor theory is just a precursor to. I don't think its description is going to be amenable to just a simple human read. That's going to be, I think, a huge challenge. Would there be something that would just be as simple as a standard model or something to describe it? It doesn't look like
the standard model's not simple.
Well, it's not. It's going to be made much simpler when it's eventually defeated and removed and replaced with something. But let's pretend OKR is the pointer to something that says it is a quantum holographic kind of model that requires the state of all the quantum.
Are you you sound a little bit like ultra happy. I feel like there's a happy person clamoring to come out when you say words like that, Ralph. Am I reading that right?
I'm happy because it's been Advent today and I spent a lot of day with lots of old German ladies. This is my Advent duties. So probably quite blissful. That's probably what you're detecting. But it's not connected. But yeah, I think it's very interesting, isn't it? Especially as it's my kind of discipline that matters. It's going to impact us, right? Now that we know it's going to be done with, it's non-computable. We know it's non-computable. Must going to be modeled by qubits. So it's all the good stuff coming. But like I say, I'm tired and blissful. I should let you guys get on with the show. I'm conscious. I don't want to derail or disrupt Doooovid's or your stream. So I think
you were a very valuable contributor to the stream, and hopefully.
Before you go, I want to ask you if you feel diminishing returns on your streams, just kind of like repeats. If you're like the Jerry Springer show, and it's like you can't tell if it's a repeat or something new because it's basically the same people giving the same arguments again and again.
Only temporarily, because in about 6 to, depending on what the schedule comes in, about 6 to somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks, I will be removing my channels and everything permanently.
Oh, I mean, so there is diminishing returns, like it's just not.
Not for that reason. I'll be removing it unconditionally anyway, because of other things we're doing. So it's going to be a bit of community fun for the boys on the way out, and a couple of key kind of social measurements of disruption, and then I myself will be vanishing from these kind of activities and be resurfacing to do something else. That's the next stage of the mission, if you like. So for the lads who've been with there 2.5 years in the journey, it's their kind of playtime on the way out. And all the lessons learned to the right, getting Nazis to talk to Jews is a good thing on the way out. And in about 4 to 6 weeks, I'll probably terminate the channel, 6-7 weeks tops. So.
Okay. Well, good luck with that, and thanks for coming on. And maybe we'll stay in
That's every
contact.
stream, right?
And it's a little, I guess, occasionally fulfill the duty, if you call it fun, having these, dumpster fire argument streams. But certainly
They're
the
very
research
popular.
on consciousness and chunking will go on. And so appreciate you coming on. And maybe
man,
we'll
you
see
guys
you
have
around
good
if you're
stream. I'll
doing
listen
some
to you for a
streams
while.
this week.
I'll listen to
Maybe
them.
we'll bump into each other.
I know we will. Blessings, peace.
Bye. Yeah, I agree. Topology is amazing in theory, and I'm really disappointed that I didn't get more out of the class. Like, it just wasn't clicking. We all have limitations in what we can do, and I guess this is one of mine. But basically, it doesn't need to be as far. It doesn't need to go as far as, the cup. The cup's just really not the thing to be likening this to, because that's way too abstract. So it's not as generalized as the homeomorphism, because this is basically saying, well, it doesn't matter if there's a non-differentiable border, we can reconcile all non-differentiable borders, and that would be a big problem, because we have just the notion of something being differentiable is a problem. So then to say that, well, we can do this other thing that makes stuff that wasn't differentiable before I ate the edge of the cup suddenly differentiable, well, that's just going in the right direction, the wrong direction in terms of what exactly we want to be doing. But I think what the transformation is still wouldn't technically qualify as a homeomorphism, because via the quantization principle, the universe fundamentally predicated on quantized conditions, effectuate energetic changes in energetic distributions. The first thing that would happen is a quantization. So there'd be a crystallization of matter that wasn't there prior, which you sort of made clear with this comparative diagram between a mushroom and an apple, where when you're looking at something going against gravity, the crystal is occurring on top of the field. Now, field, we want to be, that's a big tent field. That's not presuming the Euclidean axioms, which we can't presume because it goes against the natural entanglement of the space-time event. We just want to think of it, we can call it a form because that's the basic idea. Animating potential, if you will. So when you get the crystal on top, it grows with the stalk. So there's a mass inside of the pump as well as on top when it's going against gravity. When it's going with gravity, you see it's different. There's actually a hole where the center is to some measure, and crystals, which would be the seeds in the apple, as well as the center of the field is filled in instead of top. So, well, there's the tubing coming in from the top, but not a substantial, which you would call crystal. You'd say the majority of crystals happening inside. I don't know, still working on the jargon, but very interesting stuff in the sense that it's a cookie cutter that's always the animating potential, and it helps to see it just as a single thing. It's not well defined as far as I know, because I've never seen any reconciliation. I mentioned earlier, like with regards to the quantization event, other than the Dirac delta, which has issues because you're assuming there's the time dependence in the not the Copenhagen equation, not the Stockholm equation either, the Schrodinger equation. Thank you. Yes. So whatever it is going to be a combination of something pre-existing, but we can't really avail ourselves of these concepts of a function, because that presumes that there's independence or one value of y per value of x. That's where the problem is. That's almost never going to be the case, except for in the trivial case, which is not going to be interesting theoretically. So anyway, yeah, that's about all I had to say on that.
Did you want to do your week in review?
Sure.
So when you talk about something else than your week in review for like a minute, I got to use the restroom, and then move on to your week in review. And I'm going to do something in the background. I got to organize some CDs that I can put up on my eBay. So I'll be listening. So just talk about something for a minute till I come back, and then I'll be organizing CDs while you say what you did this week, and I guess your T jump or whatever your research is.
And there was another concept that got mentioned earlier. Put us over to the right spot. This is an interesting looking one. Two continuous functions. Okay, so rather than getting lost in these particular mathematical things, what's really important, at least action principle, luckily the Eigen Bros channel put a video out this week covering that very subject. So the question, I guess the way I would frame it is, what amount to axioms, framing observables of space and time that are in accordance with, perhaps if not the actual functioning of space and time, most the least inaccurate correlate thereof. I've got a request to talk more about alpha and omega. I assume you're referring to this one. Yeah, so I took my Blender rendering of the Blender render, not even rendered, honestly. I don't even know how to go that far with it. Do not have high expectations of me and knowing how to operate these things. Okay. I figured if I would separate the spheres a little bit, it would be easier to perceive why this shape corresponds slightly to what has been modeled as a space-time event. You can have a look at Thad's channel. I got Thad here and Eigenbros, and I'll get those links after and put them in the chat, hopefully. Yeah, so you can see when you're making a continuous, I wanted to first draw attention to the notion here that if you're making an if you're making a continuous approximation to something that's actually discrete in its form representation, you're going to get close, but in a really very much no cigari type of fashion. And that was the point of including this diagram here, where it's like the one in the center on the bottom, that's Thad's diagram. This is not a dig at Thad. I really respect the work he's doing. This is just what he has access to. There's no other like rival quantum periodic table. It's obviously if somebody had this notion, they would have basically have the exact same results as me. There's no real, you either kind of get it or you don't type thing. But the point is that you can find a similar generalized truth if you take the wrong axioms, but you're going to miss a tremendous amount of detail. Because these space-time events, they can only really be, yes, they have, in theory, could occupy all the ranges of possible shapes, but in practice, it's only really banding effects. And we can see that the grand supreme ultimate banding effect, or restrictive effect, or limit, if you will, is the measurement limit. 3 plus 1. What we experience as 3 plus 1 and try to unlock that to some measure was already done vis-a-vis this notion about space-time events. I've got a physics book right here, in fact, where I could go and read a course that was taken some time ago, but talking about space-time events and special relativity and et cetera, right? So I do think you can derive those shapes just through C, pretty much, through a particular implementation of special relativity. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here. I didn't check it super closely, but if we look at what they're respectively telling us, well, if you're super drunk, maybe they'll look the same. Like, I'd be quite drunk for those to look the same. The periodic table is telling us that a space-time event is only infinite in one way, but it's finite in another way. And so the infinite and the finite are actually canonically conjugate in this sense. So we have the infinite, whereas like everything material is one of these 118 states, 59 spheres, 118 states, because each sphere is 2 states. Why? Just to say dualism. Just walk out without any explanation. And this is the Giga Chat. So, what do you think, Doovid? Do you want me to? Have you launched into your organizational?
You go on like another 3 minutes. I just have some CDs I have to alphabetize, so I'm listening right here. But just go on another few minutes.
Wicked. So the word that came to mind when I was working on this diagram is resolution. We're looking to perceive, may not be the right word, but have some correlate of reality with a high degree of fidelity, i.e. coherently or whatever, make its way to our little Dalek here sense experience. It's clunked its way through a pinball machine of what are likely amount to signal inversions, discrete cosine transforms. Wow, no one ever chuckled at that word before. Alrighty. The point being here that I doubt this is all of the machines that can be generated through this shape. I'd say the most interesting is probably the top right. Probably hard to tell why. It's a fractal lattice, and it's basically going through all the states from 1 to 118. So the idea is they do happen imminently. Everything's happening imminently. Can't disprove imminence to some measure. But at the same time, it's like they were happening quickly, starting from the beginning. Why? Because in the beginning, meaning 1, proton/electron, it serves as a good model because quantum mechanically, the lowest energy state, i.e. the least mass, is going to be favored. It's going to be there present in the largest amount. So it makes sense to think of it as, oh, well, the hydrogen came first, then helium, then. When really, no, it's a purely cookie cutter shape for matter, and the distribution associated with it happened all at once when the star was formed. Just boom. But there's a model then on top of that where it's not almost approximately correct, but for aesthetic purposes, we want to slow down infinity, basically, just to be able to get some grip on it. No problem with using a model. Math does this all the time. Where's the problem arise? When you foolishly, immaturely believe that a single set of axioms can solve all your understanding. Arguably, you could say a single reasoning system, which would go beyond axiom. Even that's pushing it. I don't think you can establish it for axioms. It's very far. But if you can, it's my axioms, right? So that my axioms would be the things you could go the closest to that goal, which is still not possible. The top left is sort of interesting because it's a 3-dimensional. I call it windmill barge. I mean, standard windmills, I'm not sure if they're that detailed. And then the torsion field, always hard to picture this one. So there's a dualism intrinsic to this measurement limit. What does that mean? We have a well-definedness of charge. So the same information I'm arguing is present. Okay. There is information present in both this as well as this. It's just that this one doesn't have a charge defined intrinsically. This one gives the charge element as one of its limit. I don't want to say points, but Thad would be the expert on this. I'm very much a novice. Has no past answer. Yeah, well, it's like, I don't know why you're sad about that. You're basically saying you're sad you have the answers. That doesn't make sense to me, but I feel like I should be saying sorry. So I had a lot of fun with this, and also inverting the colors and working on figuring out a way to depict it perhaps more robotically, machinishly. I'm not sure exactly. I'm thinking eventually there'll be some theorem, axiom, principle thing. I don't know how it word exactly, but basically to be alive, something has to accept at least one pump. So that would make the virus life adjacent and not alive. So it's, again, it's a definition like any definition. Definitions are always only as strong as it's how it's being used by the relevant people, and that's extremely up for debate what that means. But that's about it. Thought I saw a question here. This would look so much nicer on a see-through glass with you behind it in your ceremonial kimono. I don't want to be a distraction. People should just be focusing on knowledge here, okay? Yeah, so what is the path? I think the path is going up levels of energetic, whatever complexity, whatever you want to call it. But basically, the step transitions are these crystallizations. So first you start with the template, which is the hyperbolic complement, which is depicted on the bottom right here. And then you deform it, stepwise deformation, with a single point. Like, think of it as a lattice that later becomes a crystal, that there's always an event which makes it so that you could think of it as going flat, and then all of a sudden you're walking and you don't realize you're on, I think it's called an escalator. So yeah, that's about it. I think it's a pretty good definition. It's not contradicting what I've said already. It's just going in a more specific direction. Say, well, yes, yes, the mind's a quantum computer. Yes, it's photonic, and it has a basic geometry that at the very least is going to encompass the digestive tract. Sorry, so this wouldn't be for being alive. This would be the description for an animal. It's unclear what the pump looks like in plants and stuff, so I don't want to jump to that conclusion yet. But in terms of what else I did, talking a lot about various approaches to debating and what lows people are willing to stoop to make a point, which really makes me sad, because the point of this stuff is supposed to be to make yourself a better person, not to what? I don't understand why people are even bothering with these combos if they're not trying to make a point. And to me, a point is something that is a positive assertion that you defend using various techniques, which at no point really involves tricking the person you're arguing against into making what appears to be a mistake so you can laugh at them, like Chief Wiggum's son Ralph, like, ha ha. So anyway, oh yeah, I had a comment about eigenvectors and why that's so important. So first off, I haven't done any explanation on this, but basically the importance of a diagonalization of a matrix, which requires finding the eigenvalues, is that you can reduce high dimensional, raising a matrix to high dimension to a very low complexity, which comes to the importance of eigenvalues. And what is actually an eigenvalue doing in a general sense is it's shifting the information that's in the matrix into the vectors that are being multiplied by the matrix. Why is that important? Because that's how quantum mechanics has been modeled to date. Now, there's a slight ambiguity because on the level of disambiguation of the observer and the observed, that fact is going to be there regardless of the axioms that are taken in a Big Ten axiom sense that I'm referring to here. So basically, I'm saying that's actually a good thing. So just take it for what it's worth. It's the best you can probably get. It gives you a bit of information, and it does have a limit to what it can disambiguate. That's pretty much as good as it gets, because as good as it gets is information and then a residual. And you actually want to maximize the information in the residual, because if you get information that nullifies information that you didn't actually get meaningfully out while you took the measurement, well, that's a problem. Anyway. Yeah, so Meme says so many people didn't notice this right in front of us. So we want to just think about like why that is. And again, it comes back to principles. It's not just about being right all the time. It's about espousing a principle. Like just think, but it's not having regrets. And what does it mean to look back and actually be proud of what you did? So yeah, of course, people have an aversion to making certain, realizing certain things because they haven't realized them on their own. So they believe that the explanation has to be complicated, because if it was simple, I would have figured it out by myself because I'm smart. So it's all just stemming from an attachment to be perceived as smart. So internalize that knowledge and realize that like it's an honor and sort of a special thing to have access to that deeper level psychological knowledge. Use it wisely, i.e. not to BTFO people and get a one-up on them, even though it feels good. Do it to have a principle like the least harm. What do you think about that, Doowovid?
Yeah, and just add real quick. I just got in like 500 new CDs. I put up 50 more on my eBay page today, so I was alphabetizing a few more to get ready to put up. And I'm listening to this new course, and I'm always listening to these courses. I subscribe to the Great Courses Teaching Company, the new Bart Ehrman course on the triumph of Christianity. Is pretty interesting. And yeah, I was listening to Zobita was kind of like rambling on her own show, just saying like she's not here for entertainment. She's trying to spread a message, and people want to see they want to be entertained, they want to see conflict, they want to be like reality TV, saying okay, it's not the genre I'm trying to be in, although it's semi more popular. So if you make yourself kind of like reality TV, you get a little bit more of an audience, but then the audience is going to demand what they want to see, which is reality TV. And to accept the dissonance that if you have information that's only pertinent to experts, that it's not going to be popular, and your average person isn't necessarily going to respect like, oh, this is for experts. It might be pejorative, or just might be uninteresting to your average person. Oh, this is for experts, not for me. And so the production of content takes constant evaluation and study into communication theory of the value proposition of messenger, message, and receiver. So just that there's valuable information, like so to say the message, or if you're the messenger of valuable information, doesn't mean the receiver has a value proposition to receive that valuable information. So it's part of the purpose of Week in Review. I mentioned politically provoked, kind of going the Jerry Springer approach, which might make sense, whatever, that's how they wanted to do it, but it's not the direction I want to go. Even Ralph, whatever he's trying to do is just saying he wants to get out of whatever, why he's doing it. Even my approach, like comedy entertainment, is generally negative things, like, oh, I do it because it's fun, because it's entertaining. To see that is kind of like negative, that a person's kind of saying like, I do it because I'm dumb, because I'm an unenlightened person, is how like I interpret those statements as we argue relatively. And then learning information for its own sake, that sometimes when you're you have useful information. You could give the value proposition like, oh, this is going to be useful to you because you're going to need a career, or because it's going to produce useful things for humanity, or if it's like, math and science, that it's going to be useful for humanity, useful for building up wealth, useful for making yourself useful to society, build yourself up prestige, versus kind of the joy of figuring things out, to understanding things for the pure sake of understanding things, nothing more than that. So it's definitely so you got someone new in the chat, Skyworks, talking about the latest Zobita drama. So I'm not even familiar for drama. Like, she just is a character that sent me the link and we had some conversation. So I'm sure she has her own dramas that I'm not familiar with. And she's a bigger streamer than me. She has a bigger following. She had close to 100 live viewers. So I'm sure she does have drama. Plus, she has a bigger network, as she was telling me. Islam, speaks for close to 2 billion people. Judaism is a small people. These interests of me and Jennifer talk about are relatively niche, as opposed to just generic Islam is more likely to reach a larger audience. And like, I'm used to being the Jewish guest, so in terms of I'm going to be the Jewish guest on an Islamic network, and they want to hear from Judaism, but they're not interested in. They're just interested in a Jewish guest every once in a while. They're there for Islam. So I know you're doing T-Jump like that. I mean, you got to build your network. So as I was going through Ralph's network, he talked about Speaker's Corner and just these various factions in London that are trying to express ideas. So it's interesting to work through that network. And like Jennifer working through maybe T-Jump's network. And we talked about in the past, what does it mean to win in debate, if it's term of possibly just getting very few amounts of followers. So I was mentioning this new course in Bart Ehrman on the triumph of Christianity. It was talking about the growth of Christianity, the nature of Christianity, where Christianity was largely zero sum, that once you became Christian, you were basically only Christian, couldn't be anything else, as opposed to pagan. So if you had a debate between a pagan and a Christian, or if you in front of an audience, and if the pagans win, it's not like the Christians lost, because you could typically be Christian and pagan. But if the Christian won, eventually the Christian would no longer be able to be pagan. And so, that it was kind of like a slow process like that. We're getting people to like add Christianity to their pantheon. So Jesus is part of the pantheon of the pagan deities, to then pushing the exclusiveness of Jesus and Christianity, that once you have Jesus in the pantheon, then convincing the person that Jesus is the only deity worth being worshipped, and removing all the other deities from the pantheon. And that's historically how possibly the spread of Christianity worked, at least according to Bart Ehrman, that it's a typical communication strategy that any person on the internet, just consider my idea, consider it with all these other ideas, add it to the ideas you're considering, to eventually, once they, okay, like I've added your idea to my pantheon of ideas, to moving to putting my idea at the top of your pantheon, to eventually having my idea exclusively as the only idea in your pantheon. It's kind of like a cult craft mechanism for spreading ideas. And if you wanted to put it in terms of chunking theory, that people need some sort of template.
I don't think that's spreading ideas. That's killing ideas.
Well, I mean, it goes through the process, because you could have an idea, and the goal is that your idea is going to be the supreme idea. But when they hear the idea for the first time, they have to chunk it together with information that they already have. So you give parables, analogies, to say, oh, what I'm saying is kind of like this. And then they say, oh, it's just kind of like this, and they understand it like that. And then eventually they say, well, I just told you that what I'm saying is kind of like this, but in reality it's not kind of like this. And that thing that that I originally told you was kind of like that, I just told you so you could understand the concept. In reality, what I'm telling you is uniquely true, in a way on parallel to all truths. And so minus multiple truth hypothesis, even with multiple truth hypothesis. So there's the nature of acquiring information and chunking, and that you have to relate information to information that you currently already have, and then evaluating information once you have information that's in relation to other information that you already have, to having that piece of information stand on its own that could be in comparison and contrast to information you already have, to possibly making that new piece of information the dominant paradigm that you filter new pieces of information from.
Oh, nice. Seems like you've had some development in terms of understanding the chunking theory. Or maybe your, I don't know, just general understanding.
Yeah, or just phrasing, or just experience, and being on platforms and arguing with people, and say like, okay, what am I thinking about when I'm doing this? Because a lot of this is repetitive. I'm thinking about thinking processes, and if you possibly changing minds, and then thinking about my own
It
perception.
happens when you least expect it, because there's a period, I think, I don't know about you, but a lot of people, expectation, and then wondering why it's not working, and then giving up, and then it works, and I don't know. Just saying. Things are, sorry, I want to answer something in the chat. Find the right transition model. It's not the icing model. I'm completely lost. I tend to just think about these things on my own without consulting too many things. And then I have friends who point me onto things, which helps me tremendously. And that's how I work. So there may not be a name for this, frankly. The closest that I can think of, I don't know if you followed along with that before, that we're trying to find a model that has a more or less continuous transition. Well, we're not talking about it in a functional way at all, like the y equals x thing. That's completely not there. It's just a shape. It's starting as a geometry, not creating a geometry in a field. So I'm really not sure. It's not like there's a bunch of models out there right now, or theories that are worded vaguely enough that they don't contradict my model. Whether they actually give any information that's valuable, useful, what have you, is a different story. But yeah. Yeah, the Eigenbros are great ASMR. Oh my gosh, that last one. That was a classic. Because it could, I don't know if you saw it, Doooovid, the Eigenbros principles least action. They were like conveying their emotions about the principle of least action and how intimidating it was to talk about. I agree. Yeah, so there's another problem on the level of continuity, that calculus is a model and it's not reality, and there's an issue with implementing calculus that becomes larger as you zoom more in to a system, aka uncertainty. So all that has to be taken into account. Broad strokes, what it looks like now is a set of principles, and then one of those principles is basically saying, under these specific conditions, you can model in a manner that gives the same results as calculus. It's just that to be able to put something in an XY coordinate, it's great to do it, but it's pretty much the exact opposite, if there is such a thing, of how reality actually functions. So there's going to be limitations to the point where it's actually going to impede the amount of understanding you can have of how things actually work. Last thing I wanted to mention was an argument about whether self-caused and uncaused were the same thing. And so it's interesting. Someone was saying that self-caused and uncaused is a contradiction, because if it's uncaused, then it can't have a cause, which means the self is impossible or doesn't exist or something. I don't know. It was an interesting. I was trying to think of the logic behind it, that those two notions could be computationally equivalent, although appear to contradict each other. Maybe an example that incorporates the unboundedness of the universe in such a way as to make that point clear. So I'm looking forward to exploring that more. But basically, this idea that if you're regressing through prior causes and something can't be its own cause, then you're looking at infinite prior causes or cyclic causality. That was my basic argument. Didn't go over well at all. Really badly. So anyway, perhaps it was too complicated. I tried to do it in a mathematical way, but frankly, in math, this is how you carry out proofs. Like, I don't know if you've ever done any proofs, Doovid. In induction proofs, you give examples for low numbers, and then you generalize. You presume that if it's true for n plus 1, then it's true for n.
Yeah,
Sorry. If it's true for n, then it's true for n plus 1. I got that backwards. So I did that, but they were like, they didn't respond. And I got this was a response. That's, whoops. I'm not screen sharing. Here we go. That was my response for my proof, which I'll now re-display because apparently I didn't have it up before. Whoops. There we go. I guess that's about all I got up to. In terms of consciousness, I'm hardly talking about it at all because these people don't seem to like to debate about consciousness, because I think framing the questions in terms of consciousness is probably one of the ways that makes their position look the weakest, because they're stuck denying consciousness on principle, which is pretty much brain in a jar tier. So they seemed not into that notion of discussing consciousness. And I'm interested to know if metaphysical is, am I just not, have I just been living under a rock and I haven't noticed that this term's been invoked, or is this just a first? Doovid, you see what I'm displaying here with the nature journal?
It's, I mean, I can see you're displaying something, but it's not clear enough. I mean, I'm only getting 360 pixels, so I can't read it.
Oh, my bad. I'll share it in the chat.
Now I can see it a little bit better, but psychedelics alter metaphysical beliefs.
Yeah, so you know why induction proofs don't feel right is because the whole presuppositional structure is fungibility. People aren't fungible. Okay, if we're going to argue that people are fungible, we can't assume that. Because even if it seems like that, we can't assume that the seeming like that's what it is actually valid. The only thing we can do induction for is when we actually have good grounds to presume indistinguishability. Like, even sand isn't really fungible. So yeah, for what they are, I agree. They don't even feel right with numbers, but the only way they could possibly feel right with numbers is with numbers, because numbers are fungible in the sense that the distance from 1 to 2 and 100 to 101, any one, I'm saying those are all fungible. Oh, someone in the chat who knows the Speaker's Corner posse. Yeah, like I said, I don't know any of them, so.
Yeah, David Levy was in the chat when I was on Claire's the other day.
That was pretty hilarious to listen to her rant about me getting ripped off by T-Jump.
So do you have anything else you want to wrap up?
Sure, we could. So you haven't basically had any consciousness type stuff either then, or any insights with regards to consciousness?
Well, I'm still reading these books. I might go back to doing streams on chess expertise. I have these Ask the Rabbis and more stuff on consciousness, so it's possible I'm going to go back to doing streams on my own channel or trying to have interviews. Actually, Henry Doktorsky messaged me yesterday sending me his new book, Volume 4, of his Guns, Gold, and God, History of New Vrindavan. So he's came out with 5 volumes now. He came out with them out of order, Volume 5 first, then Volume 3, then Volume 1. then volume 2, then volume 4. So I have volume 2 on my desk, and volume 4 he's about to send me. So maybe I'll read those and I'll have them on my channel, and maybe I'll start streaming on my channel again, Ask the Rabbis and stuff. But as of now, I'm doing mostly research, appearing on other channels, and I have to think. I want to put out good content, and even from my own perspective, because it's unclear like exactly who people ask me like about my content, or or for new content, but I want to really get my research down, and then maybe I'll start putting out content again. So I'm still doing research, but nothing necessarily great insights to share this week. And so I got I did a lot of streaming this week, so I was on tens of hours of streams, Abita and Ralph, hours of streaming, and then I got these new CDs that I've been going to list and put up, and I've been doing a lot of work and different things, helping my parents out. Nothing that great of insight to share this week.
Well, thanks for the news articles that you covered. Appreciate that. And I guess we can wrap it up for now. Really appreciate everyone tuning in. We have higher numbers this week, so yay!
Okay, well, I'll sign out, and if you want to continue ramble or talk to the chat, feel free.
Sure. So yeah, if there's any questions in the chat, awesome. I had a couple of articles that I hadn't covered. Did humans invent math, or is it a fundamental part of existence? And it just keeps coming back to this over and over and over. And well, sometimes when you're starting to feel like you're knocking your head against a wall, that means that you've probably posed the question erroneously. So maybe math is fundamental to existence, but that doesn't really actually tell us much, because math is something that is happening kind of on top of reality. Like, what does that mean? Is math fundamentally an analytic process, fundamentally geometric, and so on? So here it says math, a human construct, basically. Again, kind of gotta wonder why it's always worded in what appears to be an obscure manner, but I guess you could make that criticism about my work. Pythagorean school. I believe reality is fundamentally mathematical. Now, it's really hard to interpret ancient texts, so we really should resist the urge to jump to conclusions as regards interpretations, because we've seen all the silliness that goes on with the number of straw man people have to put up before they can attempt to delude themselves into thinking they can undermine my position on associated positions. It's not really my position. It's just the standard view that has been held, as it's the easy, perhaps easiest is the wrong term, but it's the view that can be defended. Skyworks says that math. Oh, whoops! It just popped out of the screen. Math's a framework that fits and describes aspects of the universe. Yeah. So when we say something fits, excuse me, you have to be careful what we mean by something fits, because just because calculus works really well doesn't mean that it fits with reality. It doesn't. So if you were looking at this reasonably, you'd be thinking, well, which trumps the other? And obviously, physics trumps math on the level of, if math tells us a physical process is impossible, but it turns out to be possible, well, that just means the math is wrong. I mean, obviously. But then there's a problem built into this where you're interpreting the result. You're sort of pre-biasing your ability to do what we understand as science. Because these hypotheses are hardly floating in a vacuum, right? We can convince ourselves that there's a degree of non-subjectivity, whatever that may mean, but then it's actually reasonably establishing it independently of ourselves. Yeah. That's where we get into trouble. So obviously there's something, it's just a question of, well, what's the best way to word it? And so someone was asking before about, excuse me, whether we can have a black hole. Well, you sort of answered your own question. You keep coming back to this concept you can't understand. Because you can't understand it. Like, you know, I hate to quote Claire there, but you can't explain nonsense. Yeah, so Doovid, I don't know if you want to send this person the link. I can't multitask that well right now, but if you're in the chat and you want to send anyone the link, you can. I was just going to wrap up in a couple minutes, unless there's any questions in the chat. We don't have a singularity, but we have a centroid. So the centroid is a region that has some correspondence to these notions about Platonism, but fundamentally, gravity self-attracting, whereas quantum state exclusion, that's information telling us there does in fact exist a maximum density. I seem to be getting a lot of friction, may not be the right word, but excuse me, resistance to this idea that volume can exist independently of matter. So yeah, I guess it's very hard to see that, how there can be a volume created when a space-time event is created, and then on top of that it can evolve through time, and that the volume and the time are in some sense connected, because volume has to do with the amount of time it takes for the planets to go around the sun, but that they're not equivalent. Yeah, frankly, I probably can't hang out for too much longer here, because I think I'm having a bit of like scratchy throat just for maybe talking too much. But basically, there appear to be two arrays that are energetically allowable. So basic approach is range of allowable shapes, and then there's a subset of that range that is the one that's in the, it's not about something happening with 100% probability, it's about the probability being maximized in a particular region, and then so having a maximal probability distribution at that quote point, but it's not really a point, it is a energetic proximity which has a physical correlate, aka distance. It defines a distance. Reality defines a distance metric. We have to be ultra careful when we try and axiomatize and assuming that it's actually going to be that we can be right in that sense. We haven't done enough sanity checks, so to speak. All right, so this article is pretty recent. Helpful diagrams put out on July 12th, it looks like. And these are obviously not finished, but trying to put it in the sense of, well, when you're learning this from the beginning, it does sort of make sense to start with cosmology, because cosmologically speaking, it's simpler, because there's 4 actions here and there's only 2 in the dark matter. A lot easier to understand 2 than 4, even though the 2 is pretty complicated. Part of the process involves just letting go of the expectation that you can have a geometric intuition. You can't have a geometric intuition for everything. Maybe some people can have even a better geometric intuition than me. That is possible. But it's never going to be unlimited. So at some point, you're going to have to say, well, my geometric intuition only take me so far, because it's really presuming orthogonal space-time. Space-time is not orthogonal. Space-time is entangled. It's actually orthogonal too, but it's also entangled, right? So the axioms we have right now basically can't do that, because we're on some level presuming those things are incompatible, like aka, you know, A and not A incompatible. Okay, so yeah, this is pretty much just a basic approach of how you would show stars being pumped into existence. And then once you get that, you have to go into differentiated matter. So the argument is the differentiated matter is emergent from the undifferentiated matter, and it's also at a much higher energy level. And it's at a higher energy level because the level that it came from is 0 point energy adjacent. Now, it's questionable as to whether we can even define relative energies necessarily in dark matter. And when I say dark matter, I'm just talking about, if you look up the sky at night, the black parts without stars. The universe can't have infinite energy, because if it did, then it would be daytime at night, right? So the question is, how do we account for what appear to be not contradictions, but very difficult things to reconcile? Generally randomness, but also seeming to have order. So much complexity in light, yet so much nothingness. That's a real mystery. But the way to think of it is in a framing way. So we already know that the majority of matter from mainstream interpretation is that it's dark matter or dark energy. Well, you could still largely regard that as true, but go a step further and say, well, what's the distinguishing factor? It's the differentiation of the electron and the proton fundamentally. And then once that happens, you have access to way more microstates. And what's the evidence for that? In the quantum periodic table. So I also got my new version of it, which lines up a little bit more with a continuous approximation to a space-time event. And just to come back to what I was saying before, is basically the idea that our axioms will determine resolution. So I did not go based on any axioms that you traditionally identify as mathematical. It was more just like, well, I know there's a way to find God there, find the God mind there. And at the very least, it would be convincing me, probably convince other people too. But and whether you agree that this supremely ordered form is a proof of God, it's certainly a demonstration of the notion that math is not objective the way it would seem like it is. That's a mirage of the mind. Sure, it's less miragey. And I'm not saying mathematicians are bad people. Like, I think the majority of errors are not on the level of intentionality. They're just on the level of not having access to the tools that would be required to have anything but the worst possible outcome be consequent to your actions. So, yeah. Informationally, comparatively, we can say that they have in common that they're both depicting a space-time event, but one doesn't really give you much info in terms of a center. So memes, when you say action flow through my model, right, like you got to look at it as steps in a harmonic resonance. So everything is perpetually approaching the corresponding geodesic and deviating in a non-zero fashion from that associated path towards it. Deviating more than zero, but minimally. So that should be a little ding for anyone who's been working for a while on the subject. That sounds a lot like dx, doesn't it? That's the same basic idea as dx, which, for those of you who don't know calculus, is the smallest non-zero x value. Is generally understood as a length or distance. And it's this well-definedness of the differential that makes calculus so powerful. So it doesn't, right? Finally, at the end of the day, it's limited to what's in the center at the bottom. It's kind of crappy. So of course we can model everything through my model. That's not the point. The point isn't to use the model to stop thinking. The point is to think with the model. So what are we doing really? Everything's going back. Everything is returning to the source. Everything's ultimately wanting to be either a sphere, or it wants to be hyperbolic figure eight, or it wants to be a circle, or a line, or a point. Now the skill is knowing what does it most want to be. The skill is knowing the eigenstates of your mechanical system in advance of any motion that it makes. So predicting vibration modalities through pure geometry. So of course we can model action flow through my model. That should be, see, you should already know that. I mean, sorry to be cranky here, but when we're talking about apples and mushrooms, that's got motion in it, right? So can we model action flow? Well, we are modeling a flow. It's just a very slow flow. It's the flow of biomass as mushrooms growing or an apple's growing. That's a flow throughput formula. So Mark says it looks symmetric. It's symmetric about the origin. Not sure if I already mentioned that. So yeah, of course we can model action flow. We have to realize that fundamentally there is no material existence to the hyperbolic figure eight knot complement, not the original pure form. The pure form, we have no access to the pure form. The pure form then is somehow distorted, Platoized, right? Like mushed around to some extent. And we still don't even have access to the mushed around version. That's the animating potential. So that's what I've tried to illustrate here, which, excuse me again, don't think I'm doing a particularly good job. But the idea is that the parts of these brooding bodies that we can point to having a material existence, well, that's not the actual animating potential. The animating potential is excluded. So basically, the mushroom is held up by something that you could probably find some type of signature, but it would be very faint to that existing. It really doesn't serve any purpose to think of it as, quote, existing. Just it's a non-existent animating potential, non-existent in the sense of being observable, but it still has an effect. And the effect is that everything else crystallizes around it to the exclusion of the limit point. And that's what's so counterintuitive about the universe, is that there's a limit point and we can't reach the limit point, but we're perpetually oscillating around the limit point. And so we get these arrays within that range of oscillations about the unreachable limit point that are like, whoa, this is so high energy, like where we are now. So high energy, how is this even possible in a universe that seems to perpetually favor descent into utter chaos? But good question there. So can we attempt a vector model is what I'm trying to ask. Yeah, I mean, vectors, memes, you got to think about vectors as being presupposing things about space-time that are incompatible with what space-time actually is. Okay, so what's a vector? What does it mean for there to be a vector in R3? Well, it means that X, Y, Z are well-defined. Are they? No, we got to find out what's well-defined. Okay, X, Y, Z aren't going to be the bases anymore. The hyperbolic complement has to be the basis because it is the thing that is causing the flow, right? So flow very basically is what is happening when the center of this shape is unoccupied. As you can see in the biological mass, that the tubal, whatever you want to call it, in the center is always semi-occupied. And that's why it's called a pump, because it's making the throughput happen. So the throughput happening in biological systems and other systems in a similar manner is the evidence that this Platonic construct, or whatever you want to call it, mathematical object, is a way for us to understand how things look. That has been determined to be quite intuitive indeed. But in terms of vectors, like, I don't know where vectors would come exactly in this, because to me, it's not just throughput flow, there's also radiance. So anytime there's throughput flow or heat, throughput flow of a warm substance, there would be heat radiating in an almost spherical manner from that center point, because you're saturating the fluid in a relatively small volume. I'm indulging my obsession with threefold symmetry, so solving this is important. Right. You're on to something. I would just say you want to avoid the mistake of just realize that it's a balancing act between precision and openness. If we're too open, we don't get any info, we don't learn anything. If we're too precise, we bias it. And we can bias it so much that we're actually now closed off from the right answer, right? So think of ourselves as a theoretically three-dimensional, what they call an omni-mic, i.e. a 3D mic, just a metaphor for consciousness. We could theoretically be this 3D mic, but actually most of us are functioning on a very tiny little, focused in on narrow band, so to speak. And so I'm not saying we should yearn to be the proverbial omni-mic, but you may not be within the range of where you need to be. So there has to be a degree of opening up one's perspective, such that not so open your brain falls out, but open enough that you can understand what the right way to frame the question is. You're not going to get a like landing on a dime answer instantly. You're going to get a little bit of information, starts to answer a little bit, resolve a tiny bit of the mystery, but you're still basically faced with the mystery, but plus mystery plus one piece of information. So check out Landau theory for phase transition stuff. Thanks. I mean, ultimately, my guess is that a lot of these theoretical understandings are usable as long as people's intention was good. Reasoning ability sort of transcends the domain of application if you're doing it right. So Mark asked if symmetry is perfection. Well, that would be a definitional thing. So do I agree with that? I would say that symmetry is a property of beauty, which I suppose would be a property of perfection. If you want to get technical. Source burps out new things, each with slightly more complexity, only to be reabsorbed and burped out again. No, the complexity is always the same. We're always looking at complexity understanding in the periodic table. It's like saying, well, did this get more complex over time, or how did the complexity of the periodic table arise? It was always just there, whether it was demonstrably there or in potential. There's no way for it to be created ex nihilo, therefore it must have just always been in potential existing, like everything else. So yeah, that's why I call it the shedding vacuum model. Just so awful. Yeah, I'm a bit of a redigested universe myself. So the Omega particle in Star Trek, sorry, I don't get that reference. The only Star Trek I've seen pretty much is in movies and the Q episodes at the behest of somebody else. But I did see the hilarious one with Sigourney Weaver and Tim Allen. I want to say Spaceballs, but that's not it. Galaxy Quest? There we go. Hilarious. Oh, that's what that reminds me of. Now, if we're going to have to live in a space fantasy universe, I want it to be that one. In terms of when I would like to exist in time, I have no complaints. This is a pretty good time. Hopefully when people are more acquainted with reincarnation, they have more appreciation for the life that they're in right away or right now. And with that, we'll say until next time, and hopefully see everyone next Sunday, if not sooner.
I mean, that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck goddamn logic?
they control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, we've had these streams, and I've been doing with Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and like we did those streams on like stream etiquette. We walked through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself cult prestige by associating herself with a retard?